A little girl looks at herself in the mirror, wondering how everything ended up like this. When she woke up, she found herself in a strange room, completely unlike anywhere she had ever seen before. Could this really be what they call reincarnation, the kind she often read about in manga and novels? Had she really died? She recognized her new face, but her body size and age were a little different for what she remembered when reading that novel. She had reincarnated into the body of Celine Eldridge, the cruel older sister of the heroine in her favorite novel, Love the Goddess. Celine used her status as a duke's daughter to live a life of luxury after abusing the heroine, her younger sister Adele. She wondered why she had to reincarnate as the villainess, because in the story, Celine was destined to die miserably at the hands of the prince, who was also the male lead. In her previous life, she had lived a terribly painful existence, suffering from a chronic illness and a frail body. Day after day, she was bedridden, enduring endless pain. That was why the only thing that brought her even a little joy was reading manga and novels. But now that she had been reincarnated into the body of such a cool villainess, she could move around freely, and just as joy began to well up inside her, she immediately tripped and fell flat on her face. It seemed she needed a bit more practice before running around. The maids hurried over in concern. They checked to see whether the young lady was hurt, and when Celine stood up, she suddenly noticed someone peeking through the crack in the door. It was her tiny, adorable, pink-haired little sister, the gentle Adele. Unlike Celine, Adele was known as a sweet and beautiful girl. In the novel, Adele meets the male lead, Crown Prince Louis, and falls in love with him. Meanwhile, Celine, the very body she was now inhabiting, also had feelings for Louis, so she abused Adele because of it. As for the second prince, he became a dark mage and chased after Louis to hunt him down. This was supposed to be the love story of two people overcoming countless obstacles and living happily ever after. Sadly, Celine was the only one who had to die. But if she had a gentle little sister like Adele, she would definitely cherish her with all her heart. The reason Celine died in the first place was because she bullied Adele. So, thinking there was still time to change the story's terrible ending, the reincarnated Celine decided to befriend her little sister. That way, she could live a peaceful life without worrying about death. At first, she had been rather depressed about becoming the story's villainess, but now she felt grateful for being given such a healthy, sturdy body. She believed that with this body, she could eat whatever she wanted and go wherever she pleased. She would make the most of this chance to live a normal, happy life and experience everything she had never had in her previous life. She also added losing weight to her list of goals, thinking she was too chubby to ever find love. Right now, you could jokingly say she was as fat as a pig. Filled with determination, she called out to her sister, and Adele startled and ran away. Seeing that reaction, Celine could guess that the bullying must have started very early for Adele to be this terrified of her. She panicked, worrying that maybe it was already too late. Celine tried her best to make it up to her sister, but Adele either ran away or was carefully shielded by the maids. Celine felt sad that she could not even get close to her. Still, it made sense. If she had treated Adele that horribly, then being treated like this was hardly surprising. Even so, she would not let it discourage her. Realizing she would have to be patient if she wanted to become close to Adele, she decided that for now, she would focus on her diet. The chubby girl ran outside, staggering and nearly falling, panting heavily as she ran, almost out of breath. But even that was nothing compared to the pain she had endured in her previous life. As she ran past Adele and the girl's mother, both of them were startled when Celine, gasping for breath, greeted them with a hello. Pushing aside their wariness, Celine kept running. From above, her father stood in his room, watching anxiously through the window. A servant explained that recently, the young lady had been running around the grounds every day. Not only that, but she had also been approaching Lady Adele more often. The Duke was utterly astonished to learn that these interactions were no longer for harassment as before, but were simply brief social conversations. During a lavish dinner at the Eldridge estate, Adele could not help being stunned when she saw how pitifully small Celine's plate of food was. Even the maids whispered among themselves, assuming something must be wrong. In the past, Celine used to eat twice, even 3 times, everyone else's portions. Her father, suspicious, asked what exactly she was plotting. At first, she did not even understand what he meant. But then Celine realized that he thought she was scheming something awful, because up until now, she had never done anything good. Seizing the chance to prove she had changed, she burst into tears and apologized to everyone for all the trouble she had caused all this time. Celine admitted that she had come to realize her mistakes and declare that from now on, she would reflect on her behavior carefully so as not to stain the family name. At the same time, she would also take better care of her figure. After that, she turned to Adele and apologized personally for all the cruel things she had done to her. She confessed that she had been jealous because Adele was gentle, beautiful, and loved by everyone, while she herself was not, and that was why she could not stop herself from bullying her. She understood if Adele could not forgive her right away, but she still hoped that one day she would be able to. Finally, she asked her father to hire the best tutor possible, someone who could teach her magic. The maids were so shocked their mouths fell open. They could not believe those words had come from the same girl who used to absolutely hate even the sight of writing. A week later, Celine wiped away her sweat after finishing another training session. She could clearly feel herself gradually getting stronger little by little, and now she could run farther than before. Since she had been so overweight to begin with, she had already lost 11 pounds in no time, about 5 kilograms. When she happened to meet her older sister that day, Adele responded to Celine's greeting. But just as Adele was about to explain that an important guest was coming to visit, her maid quickly pulled her away. Leaving Celine standing there alone, Celine guessed they wanted to keep her out of sight and avoid running into her. She decided to take the long way around so she could get a little more exercise in. Suddenly, she spotted a cat and cried out in delight at how adorable it was. Her illness in her previous life had kept her from ever being able to interact with animals. The cat arched its back, growled, and swiped at her, but before long, she had won it over. It jumped from her arms and darted away, and at that exact moment, she heard someone call her name. Standing before her was a blonde-haired teenage boy with brilliant golden eyes. She had seen him so many times in the novel that she recognized him immediately as the male lead himself, the first heir to the throne, Prince Louis Percival. She drew in a sharp breath, unable to believe that the male lead had appeared here. But then she realized this must be the very guest her sister had just mentioned. No wonder they had not wanted her appearing at his side. In the novel, Celine loved Louis and always did everything she could to cling to him. The prince remarked that she looked somewhat different, while she could only awkwardly reply, "Ah, yes," embarrassed that he had seen her drenched in sweat like this. She began to understand why the Celine in the novel had fallen for him. In person, he was far more handsome. More importantly, even though Celine had once been such a nuisance, he still treated her very gently. Adele found the two of them, and as Celine awkwardly tried to explain that she had only happened to run into the prince, she suddenly thought this might be another chance to prove she had changed. She simply needed to show them that she was no longer interested in Louis at all, no matter how obsessed she had once been with him. She smiled and apologized to the prince for her rather unsightly appearance, then made an excuse to leave. Adele stopped her, pleading with Celine to come join them after she had changed her clothes, which left Celine stunned by her sister's kindness, despite everything she had done before. She reassured Adele that she was fine, while also apologizing for always causing trouble for her in the past. She promised that she would never get in her way again. Celine was certain that the male and female leads would be just fine now, and she eagerly looked forward to seeing the two of them being sweet and loving together. What she did not realize was that the one captivated by Celine was the prince himself, Louis Percival. Later, the tutor was nearly speechless while grading Celine's test. She had gotten every single answer correct. The tutor was even more astonished when Celine bowed her head and thanked him for his careful instruction, because in the past, Celine would usually throw a fit just 5 minutes in a class. Thanks to this tutor, Celine gradually came to understand the world she was now living in. Simply being able to sit quietly at a desk and absorb knowledge was enough to make her incredibly happy. She eagerly awaited next week when she would begin practicing magic. If the heroine Adele possessed the power of the goddess, then surely Celine could at least use ordinary magic. After finishing her studies, Celine decided to go train in the forest behind the estate until dinner. She happened to overhear the maids gossiping that lately Celine Eldridge no longer seemed interested in the prince at all. while the two of them speculated endlessly over what might have happened. The maid Jenna said that Lady Celine really had changed her heart. The other one did not believe it, saying that everyone knows a leopard cannot change its spots. Celine knew those words were not wrong. If she had not been reincarnated into this body, then the original Celine would have remained exactly as she was. At the very least, knowing that Jenna had noticed her efforts brought her some comfort, and she hoped more people would come to see it too. Lying on the grass and gasping for breath, Celine could clearly feel that she was truly alive. She stood up, intending to begin another round of training, but then turned towards something hiding behind the tree in front of her. At first, she thought it was another cat, but what she saw was actually a child. Alarmed, she hurriedly asked whether the boy was all right. Receiving no answer, she quickly checked his pulse. His heart was still beating, so she decided to bring him inside for treatment. His hood slipped down, revealing a body covered in strange marks. The doctor explained that it was a curse, and an extremely powerful one at that. Those words made Celine's heart ache sharply. 2 days had passed since she brought the cursed boy home. Throughout that entire time, he had remained in a deep sleep, not moving even once. During that time, Celine learned that holy water was the most effective way to weaken a curse. The doctor believed the boy had most likely been born with this curse, and that his parents, convinced it could not be undone, had abandoned him. If things continued like this, his life would be in danger. Celine looked at the boy with deep pity in her eyes. He was still so young. She wondered how much pain he had already suffered. The people in the estate also despised him simply because he carried a curse. Her father said he would send the boy to an orphanage, but she begged him not to. She knew no orphanage could give him the proper care he needed. Her father asked why she was so desperate to save a child she had never even met before. And she knew there was no way she could ever explain that his circumstances matched what she herself had gone through in her previous life. She had once suffered from an incurable illness and been abandoned by her family. All she could do was sit there and wait for death to come. She did not want the boy to be alone and go through what she had endured. After promising her father that she would not cause any more trouble while caring for the boy, he merely sighed and told her to do as she pleased. Rumors had spread that curses could be contagious, though that was not true, and this made people fear that it would bring misfortune. Everyone wanted to stay far away from it. Ever since bringing the boy here, people had become even colder towards Celine than before. She slapped her cheeks lightly, trying to encourage herself. The best thing she could do for him right now was treat him with holy water. She gathered up all her clothes and jewelry and told the maids to sell everything. She needed money to buy holy water. It was incredibly rare and expensive, and since she had already told her father she would not cause trouble, she could not bring herself to ask him for money. When she went back to check on the boy, Celine found him writhing in pain. She placed a damp cloth on his forehead, feeling the heat of his fever clearly. Going outside to change the basin of water, she ran into Adele, who immediately asked what had happened. When Celine explained that she was personally taking care of the boy she had brought back, she guessed everyone must be suspicious of her, because up until now she had always been known as a selfish child who did whatever she wanted. Adele merely clenched her fists as she watched her sister continue working, carrying the heavy basin of ice water from the kitchen. Celine began panting from exhaustion. Fortunately, Jenna took the basin from her hands and offered to carry it into the room for her. Celine asked Jenna whether she was not afraid of the curse, and Jenna replied that she knew it was not contagious. Celine thought to herself that the maid Jenna was truly kind-hearted. At last, Celine finally obtained some holy water. She could not believe that after selling everything, she had only managed to get 3 tiny bottles. She carefully poured the holy water into the boy's mouth, her heart full of hope that he would soon get better, even if only a little. Celine let out a long yawn as sleepiness washed over her. After days of constant research and care, she was severely sleep-deprived, and then she fell asleep right beside his bed. The next morning, Celine woke up with drool at the corner of her mouth. She rubbed her eyes, then froze in shock when she saw that the boy was awake and staring at her with wide eyes. Celine reached a hand toward him, relieved to see that he had regained consciousness. But he immediately slapped her hand away and shot her a cold look. She realized that he had probably had to endure everything alone all this time, so it was only natural for him to be wary of a stranger in a strange place like this. Celine smiled, doing her best to ease his guard by explaining that she was the one who had brought him here. But he only remained silent, his icy gaze never softening. In response, Celine reassured him that she had no intention of hurting him. and that she would prepare food so he could stay alone in this room until he felt better. As she stepped outside, she thought she had never met anyone with such cold eyes. Celine did not want to force anything, but she still hoped that one day she would see him open up to her. 3 days passed. She did everything she could to make his time here more comfortable. And yet, during all that time, he had not touched the food even once. Celine tried eating in front of him to convince him the food was not poisoned, but that did not work either. At this rate, he would grow weaker and weaker until he died. Every time she brought him a hearty breakfast, she would light up with hope, only to wilt again when all she got in return was silence and no response at all. In the end, Celine simply left the food on the table so he could eat whenever he wanted, and she still refused to give up. At noon, she placed fresh flowers in his room. In the evening, she left clean clothes for him to change into. The next day, she tried talking to him all day long, but nothing changed. He went through yet another day without eating or drinking anything. Celine felt discouraged, but Jenna encouraged the young lady, saying that sooner or later the boy would get hungry, and hoping that tomorrow he would finally eat. Even so, Celine remained downcast. She collapsed onto the bed and let out a heavy sigh. She wondered whether she was doing something wrong, but then quickly shook her head and told herself she had to stay positive. Remembering the pain she had endured in her previous life, she could not leave him to die. More than anyone, she understood the feeling of loneliness that came from suffering alone. The next day, she brought him breakfast again, but once again, all she got in return was silence. 5 days had passed. The symptoms of the curse had eased, but the doctor said his life would be in danger if he still did not start eating. When she tried to feed him a few spoonfuls of soup, he violently knocked the spoon from her hand, sending it clattering to the floor. Celine smiled through the pain. She apologized for trying to force him to eat and said she would clean it up right away. Then his eyes suddenly widened. He realized she was crying terribly. Celine hurriedly claimed that something had flown into her eye, then ran out. That night, the boy heard people talking near his room, so he secretly went outside. He caught the maids gossiping about Lady Celine's intentions. They wondered why she cared so much for a cursed child. She had even sold her expensive dresses and jewelry to buy holy water for him. Those items were worth as much as their wages for many years. The boy could not believe that she had sacrificed so much just for him. The next day, thoughts of yesterday's disaster still haunted Celine as she brought him breakfast. Even so, Celine entered the room with a bright smile. Then, she was pleasantly surprised to see that he was wearing the clothes she had prepared. After setting down the food, Celine stared wide-eyed when she saw him begin to eat. She was overjoyed and deeply grateful. During a family meal, her father seemed very pleased to hear about the good progress she had made with the orphan boy. After that, he reminded her that at the end of next month, the crown prince would be holding a garden party at the royal palace, and they needed to prepare for it. But Adele still had not decided what she would wear, and Celine accidentally blurted out that she wished she could choose a dress for her sister. Realizing she had said it out loud, Celine blushed in embarrassment, but Adele stood up and smiled as she replied, "Yes, please." She truly wanted her sister to help her choose a dress. Celine was so happy her heart felt ready to leap out of her chest. She wondered whether Adele had noticed just how much she had changed. The next morning, after the boy finished breakfast, she chattered on and on about it. Midway through the conversation, she suddenly realized that she had started losing weight again. Maybe it was thanks to taking care of the orphan boy. Celine asked whether he wanted anything from her upcoming shopping trip, like books or toys. But then it suddenly occurred to her that she still did not know his name. She asked him what it was, and he replied, Win, his face still calm and expressionless. That alone was enough to make Celine indescribably happy. She hoped the two of them could gradually come to understand each other better. At Prince Louis Percivan's residence, he felt a trace of unease in his heart. He wondered whether Lady Celine would attend his party. He remembered how she had apologized for bothering him in the past and said that she would not interfere with him anymore. It was precisely because of that strange behavior that Prince Louis wanted to see her again. The next day, when they went shopping together, Celine beamed when she saw how beautiful Adele was. Every outfit looked perfect on Adele, so Celine could not decide what to buy for her. The two truly grew close during that shopping trip. The joy was so overwhelming that by the end, Adele burst into tears. She was incredibly happy. Adele had always wanted to be friends with Celine. The two sisters embraced each other, crying and sobbing, and in the end Adele fell asleep on her sister's shoulder. From that moment on, Celine decided that Adele would always come first. She would protect her sweet, lovely little sister and make sure she was always happy. Returning to Win, she brought him lots of new clothes, sweets, and toys. They were all for him. As she set them beside him, she suddenly realized it was too much. She had never meant to buy so many. She had just been too happy thinking about what he might like. Win blushed faintly, clutched the hem of his clothes, and softly thanked her. Today truly was a happy day for Celine. She quietly hoped bright days like this would last forever. 1 month later, Celine could clearly see that she had lost a lot of weight. Even so, compared with Adele, she was still far from her ideal figure. She happened to run into her younger sister and stepmother. Both of them smiled and greeted her warmly. "Good morning, sister." "Good morning, Celine." Recently, Celine had built quite a good relationship with both of them. Then, when she arrived at Win's room, he greeted her too. "Good morning." She patted his head and praised him for studying diligently all morning. Win's recovery was going very smoothly. He could already walk and live normally, though he still had a fever from time to time. Recently, Celine had also been teaching him how to read and write, as well as knowledge about their country. Celine had become Win's tutor. She found him adorable when he listened carefully to every word she said. In her eyes, Win was an upright and kind boy who toddled after her like a little chick. She regarded him as her precious little brother. She wanted to help him so that one day he would be able to live independently. One day, while taking him for a walk, she noticed some mushrooms that looked rather appetizing. Win immediately told her not to eat them, or she would not be able to breathe. He said that back when he was starving, he had once tried eating them himself. Celine was suddenly shaken, thinking about how he had had to learn everything on his own through such painful experiences. Just thinking about the life he had lived up until now was enough to make her heart ache. She suddenly pulled Win into a hug, promising that from now on she would protect him. After their walk, she waved goodbye to Win and said she was going jogging as part of her diet. He asked what good that would do. She answered honestly, "Because I'm fat, of course." He calmly replied, "But you've always been cute." That remark flustered her so much that she did not know how to react. It was the first time in her life a boy had ever called her cute. She was very grateful, but she also understood that not everyone saw her that way. She still hoped that one day she would be able to love and be loved. She told him sincerely that she was trying her very best to be ready and wait for the one prince of her life to appear. The word prince seemed to catch Win's attention in particular. Celine then chattered on again about how beautiful Adele would look tomorrow at the royal ball. Hearing her say that Adele was the top priority in her life, his heart gave a slight pang, because he had begun wanting to keep Celine all to himself. At the garden party, the atmosphere around Celine was rather awkward. Almost everyone disliked her and saw her as nothing more than a troublemaker. The only good thing was that she was still the Duke's daughter, so no one dared say that to her face. She intended to slip away quietly and find a corner for herself, but Deli grabbed her hand and held it tightly. The other guests could not help being astonished to see how close the two sisters had become. Prince Louis appeared to thank everyone for attending, and when the two sisters bowed, Celine thought to herself that he looked even more radiant than usual. When she noticed his gaze resting on her, Celine began to worry. She wondered whether this dress truly did not suit her after all. She was about to make an excuse and leave, but Adele moved faster, saying, "Mother is calling me," and asking the prince to keep her sister company for a moment. Inwardly, Celine groaned. She wondered whether Adele thought she still had feelings for the prince. No matter what, he seemed very happy to have some private time with her. He took her hand, leaving her unable to understand how things had ended up like this. Louis said that everyone had been very surprised by her change and wanted to know what had made her become so different. Celine replied that for a long time, she had realized she had been an incredibly selfish and awful person. She could not tell him that she had transmigrated. Celine admitted that she had abused her status and social position to do whatever she wanted, and that she had once been jealous of her beautiful younger sister, who was loved by everyone. But from now on, she would not cause any more trouble. Celine was about to apologize to the prince, but he said it was unnecessary. He had never thought of her as a nuisance. She felt relieved that he was as gentle and kind as Adele. More than anything, Celine sincerely hoped that the two of them would end up together. After Celine boasted that she had lost 20 pounds, he smiled and said she looked even prettier than before. She thought it was just polite flattery, but she still felt very happy to hear it. The two talked for quite a while, and by the end they both felt extremely comfortable and cheerful. She quietly thought that if the prince married Adele in the future, they would all become one family. But Celine never expected him to turn to her and ask, "May I come visit you again?" She assumed the person he wanted to see was Adele, so she immediately replied, "Of course." According to the original novel, Celine would later be executed by Louis himself, so she felt relieved to know that, at least for now, he had a better impression of her. When the party ended, Celine let out a soft sigh. She had not made friends with anyone at the garden party. It was all because back in the past, she had gotten angry and splashed tea on other people. Adele comforted her and told her not to worry. "Next time, I'll help you." Later, Celine told Win that if he made friends too, it would surely be fun. But he merely replied indifferently, "I don't need friends," then shyly tugged at the hem of her clothes. In a small voice, Win added, "Having you is enough for me." She hugged him tightly, laughing as she told him he was adorable, and said she was very happy that he was so fond of her. In Celine's heart, he was still only her little brother, and she loved him dearly. But to Win, she was his everything. After that, she told Adele that she was no longer interested in Louis, even though before reincarnating, she had liked him very much. The day when curiously asked who Louis was, and heard that he was the crown prince, he immediately paid special attention to the subject. When he heard Celine say she had once liked him, Win clenched his fist. One day, the entire estate became extremely lively in preparation for Prince Louis's visit. Celine praised Win's diligence. She realized he was smarter than she had thought. He remembered everything he was taught very quickly, and his memory was exceptionally sharp. She thought that before long, he might be able to handle a few simple tasks around the estate. Seeing Prince Louis appear through the window frame, Win muttered, "He's completely different from me." Just then, there was a knock at the door. A maid entered and said that the Duke was asking Celine to attend tea with Prince Louis. She found it very strange, because her father had never invited her to join things like this before. She turned and promised Win that she would be right back. But he immediately stopped her and told her not to go. Celine tried to reassure him, saying that she would only be gone for a little while. But he still shook his head and said, "No," tightening his grip on her arm. Celine did not understand why, but it was clear that he truly did not want her to leave. She wanted to stay too, but she could not refuse Prince Louis's invitation, nor her father's command. When Celine left him behind, Win stood there alone and whispered, "Why is it always him?" Celine could not understand why the prince and her younger sister did not communicate with each other at all. She tried to create chances for the two of them to talk, but for some reason, they only wanted to talk about her. She tried many times to slip away, but they would not let her go. By all logic, the two of them should have grown closer by now. Even someone as dense about romance as she was could tell that there was not the slightest trace of romantic attraction between them. Day after day, Prince Louis kept visiting Celine. She wondered why he came even on days when Deli was not present. Celine asked her steward why Louis was visiting so often, and the servant guessed that the king had ordered Louis to choose a fiancé. While Celine hardly paid attention to what the servant said, she thought there was no way she could possibly be the one he had chosen. Lately, she had been so busy that she no longer had time to relax and read with Win the way she used to. She suddenly felt sad, thinking that lately everything seemed to revolve around Louis. Recently, Win had been clinging to Celine even more than before. He did not speak to Adele or Jenna, nor did he look anyone else in the eye. Celine was happy that the boy was attached to her, but she also thought it would not be good for Win if he refused to socialize with the people around him. She invited him for a walk, and outside, the two of them admired the beauty of the flower buds just beginning to bloom. She asked him what kind of flower he liked, and he answered Celine. She froze, her face turning red, but quickly regained her composure. She smiled and replied, "I like you too, Win." He tightened his hold on her hand and said, "I love you the most." Win then leaned his face close to hers and whispered, "I want to be your number one." She thought it was hard to rank priorities when there were so many precious people in her life. So she answered, "You and Adele are both my number one." And his reaction showed that he had been hurt by that answer. As they kept walking, Win suddenly stopped. He had seen Prince Louis, and Celine had no idea that he would be coming today. Louis asked whether Win was the boy Celine had mentioned before. Celine answered that he was. The two boys stared at each other face to face. This was the beginning of the struggle for a place beside that chubby young lady, Celine Eldridge. Louis tried to ask Wynn's name, but instead of answering, the boy only frowned at the prince. Celine could tell that, for some reason, Wynn truly disliked this prince. She quickly cut in, saying that Wynn was simply shy. Louis reassured her that it was fine, and at the same time apologized for calling out to them so suddenly, worrying that he might have frightened Wynn. What Louis did not see was Wynn tugging at the hem of Celine's clothes, his hand trembling. She quickly excused herself and brought Wynn somewhere more secluded. He was still shaking uncontrollably, and then he burst into tears. His head was filled with thoughts like, why is there someone else? No, that's not fair. I hate them. I won't forgive them. Don't abandon me. Celine hugged him tightly, thinking that something must have triggered the trauma in his heart. She stayed by his side until evening fell. Only when he finally calmed down did she guess that he must have gone through unimaginable pain. And she silently vowed that from now on, she herself would be the one to erase all of those painful memories. Gripping her clothes tightly, he asked softly, does that mean we'll stay together forever? She wondered if he was afraid of the possibility of being left alone once again, since his parents had once abandoned him. She understood that feeling, and as she embraced him, Celine said, yes, we'll be together forever. Wynn became so overjoyed that she had no idea she was inadvertently nurturing something in his heart. The next morning, when Jenna helped Celine get ready for the day, she praised the young lady's beautiful eyes, comparing them to amethysts. Celine was happy that recently everyone had been treating her so well. She also thought Adele's icy blue eyes were incredibly beautiful. Prince Louis's eyes carried a brilliant golden hue, full of charm. That was when Jenna mentioned that Prince Louis was special. Golden eyes were proof of royal blood. Only people of the royal lineage were born with those golden eyes. It made perfect sense in a fantasy world. Celine was especially fond of Wynn's black hair and black eyes, because they made her feel nostalgic. Those were the colors of Asians. She enjoyed yet another peaceful day, studying while spending time with Adele and Wynn. She wished days like these could last forever, but she also knew that in the future, countless troubles would arise between the two main characters. The person she needed to watch most closely was probably the second prince, also known as the final boss. The second prince had been born cursed. When he was still very young, his own father, the king, had nearly ordered his execution. Only with his uncle's help had he managed to escape. He lived a life completely different from that of the first prince, Louis Percival, who had been raised with love and care. In the end, he sought to destroy both the royal family and Louis. Celine couldn't blame him, because hating those who had treated him that way was only natural. Even so, even if the second prince attacked them, Louis's heroic power and Adele's goddessly power should still be enough to keep everyone safe. Celine knew very well that the only one fated to die was herself. She wondered what the curse originating from the second prince would look like, and whether it was different from the one Wynn was enduring. She had no idea that whenever he was alone, Wynn was still silently enduring the pain of his own curse. The agony was so intense that it brought him to his knees on the floor. In front of the mirror, Celine tried out a few poses, unaware that the head butler was standing right behind her. When he asked what she was doing, Celine was so embarrassed she broke out in a sweat. She simply wanted to admire how her figure had changed. When he praised her, saying she looked much slimmer, she immediately lit up with joy. She kept training whenever she had free time between studying and magic practice. She had also gotten used to eating less, since dieting had greatly reduced her appetite. It was the harsh life from her previous life that had given her such strong determination. She felt she still had many things to lose, especially since her figure was still rather full compared to her younger sisters. But honestly, I think she already looked very pretty. When Celine held a tea party, all the young ladies attending looked extremely tense. A few days earlier, she had said that she wanted to make friends, and her mother had suggested inviting girls her own age to a tea party. Unfortunately, the gathering sank into an awkward silence. Adele was the one who broke that awkwardness by praising how delicious the sweets were, deliberately drawing attention to the fact that her sister wanted everyone to have a good time. Then a red-haired girl suddenly asked Celine whether she had made up with Lady Adele yet. Celine recognized her as Wilhelmina, the Marquis of Forest's daughter. When Wilhelmina brought up how Celine had once spoken badly of Adele and mocked her in front of everyone, Celine admitted that she had apologized to her sister and begged for forgiveness. She acknowledged that she had been jealous, but promised that from now on she would take good care of Adele and protect her. And Adele had forgiven her, despite how terribly she had treated her before. Hearing that, Wilhelmina smiled, pleased that Adele had forgiven Celine. She felt that made everything all right. Life was about reflecting on your mistakes and starting over again. That gradually helped the other girls relax as well, and they began snacking together. In the end, everyone was finally able to enjoy themselves for real. When it was all over, Celine thanked Wilhelmina for helping her, then asked if she would be her friend. At the family dinner, Celine was delighted as her father praised the positive changes in her life lately. He mentioned that all her tutors said she was very diligent and learned quickly. It was the first time her father had ever praised her like that. She was so overjoyed that she burst into tears. She promised she would keep working even harder. After that, she noticed when busily working as well. Over the past month, he had often helped the gardener. He brought her a flower. The gardener said it was the very first flower Wynne had grown with his own hands. He had worked very hard just so he could give it to her. Celine gently accepted it and promised she would treasure it. That made him happy. Celine felt truly fortunate. She had been reincarnated into a healthy body and was surrounded by the people she loved. She thought these happy days would continue to pass peacefully. Celine quietly gazed at the flower Wynne had given her. It was the first gift she had ever received from him, and she didn't want it to wither, so she spent a large sum to have an expensive preservation spell cast on it. When asked if she would be happier if he gave her more gifts, she answered that of course she would. But what made her happiest of all was seeing him healthy and cheerful. Hearing that, his eyes widened in surprise. She asked if something was wrong, but he only clung to her arm and said it was nothing. Celine felt that lately Wynne wasn't like he used to be. He always said he was fine, yet he barely ate. The other day, he had even reacted strongly when she tried to take him to see the doctor. Celine had decided not to force him to do anything, but deep down she still thought she should invite the doctor to come soon. During her magic lessons, the heroine discovered that Celine actually had considerable magical talent, and she felt it was such a waste that this character in the novel had never studied seriously. It was said that around 30% of the population in this world could control magic. The four basic elements were fire, water, wind, and earth, quite similar to Avatar. However, in this world, people could use several elements at once, and the important thing was finding which element one was most compatible with. Celine tried using earth magic, but it seemed she wasn't very suited to it. Then she turned and saw a flower wilting, and couldn't help feeling a pang in her heart. She wondered whether magic could nourish the soil it grew in. So she focused her mind and cast a spell, causing the flower to slowly recover to a healthy state. No, even more than that. It shone with such brilliant light that even her tutor had not expected it. He immediately ended that day's lesson, and afterward, Celine was summoned to her father's study. She anxiously thought that perhaps she had caused some kind of trouble. She never expected her father to say that he had heard the power of the goddess had awakened within her. Healing a withered flower was a form of recovery magic. Celine thought there must be some kind of mistake because the only one who was supposed to possess that power was Adele, the heroine of the story. She couldn't believe that a villainess like Celine could possibly possess such a power. Duke Eldridge ordered the tutor to bring out a stone tainted with dark magic, and with just a single touch from Celine, the stone was completely purified. There was no longer any doubt. That was the power of the goddess. No other kind of magic could do what she had just done. Her father believed this was a great honor, and that she would be praised throughout the kingdom. For any ordinary person in this world, it would have been a momentous event. But for her, only anxiety flooded in, because she felt the story was about to head in a completely different direction, especially when she heard her father declare that she would definitely become Prince Louis's fiancée. The power of the goddess was the most precious thing of all. There was no doubt the king would choose her to marry his son. But Celine was afraid, because that would destroy the destined bond between her younger sister, Adele, and Prince Louis. Celine didn't know what to do. Her mind was in a haze, constantly thinking about what had happened the day before. Last night, they had held a grand banquet to celebrate the awakening of the goddess's power within her. She had never seen her father so happy before. In 2 weeks, the archbishop would return from overseas and he would confirm her power. Once that happened, everything in her life would truly change. She wanted to delay things until Adele's goddess power awakened, but then she wondered whether that would really happen at all. Suddenly, her heart skipped a beat and she asked Wynne if something was wrong. He answered that he was just a little hungry. Celine innocently said she would go prepare lunch for him, completely unaware of the pain Wynne was enduring. During afternoon tea with Louis and Adele, Celine kept receiving unwanted praise from the two of them for possessing the power of the goddess. Louis explained that the chosen one was said to be born into the kingdom's nobility, possess abundant magical power, and have a pure and beautiful heart beloved by the goddess. When she learned that there could be more than one chosen person, she felt relieved, thinking that her sister might still awaken the goddess's power, just like in the novel. But she feared that by then, it might already be too late, and Celine might already be married to Louis. Her thoughts began to spin in confusion, while Adele and Louis merely thought she was overwhelmed by her new status. Adele used the excuse of going to get Celine's favorite sweets, leaving the two of them alone together. Taking the chance, Louis asked Celine whether she would like to go out with him next weekend. She said yes, and told him that when Adele came back, she would ask her to come along too. But Louis stated plainly that he had no intention of inviting Adele. He wanted to go out with her alone, just the two of them. Afterward, Adele excitedly cheered Celine on for being invited on a date. In her previous life, Celine had never had any relationship with the opposite sex. She had never imagined something like this would happen to her. She grabbed Adele by the shoulders and asked how she felt about Louis as a man. Adele replied that she didn't feel anything special. She had absolutely no romantic interest in the prince. Celine was stunned. Adele and Louis should have already been in love. Reality was truly being altered, and she thought all of this was her fault. When Adele said that she wanted to personally choose a dress for Celine's date next week, Celine sadly thanked her. Even in a situation like this, Adele was still so lovable that no one could bring themselves to be angry with her. At the Forest Marquis's estate, Wilhelmina smiled and said, a secret date with His Highness? Still, she could tell that Celine did not look happy at all. Celine candidly admitted that what she wanted was only an ordinary marriage, one where the two people truly loved each other. And Wilhelmina thought Celine was far cuter than she had expected. She understood that most nobles married for political reasons. Love rarely had anything to do with it. Just like Celine's father, the Duke's first wife, Celine's birth mother, had died right after giving birth to her. Not long after that, he quickly fell in love with and married his current wife, the daughter of a baron, and then Adele was born. Wilhelmina understood why Celine had become so bitter. She prayed that Celine would find the wonderful person she had always longed for, and asked to be the first to hear the news when that day came. On Celine's date with the prince, they enjoyed a famous opera together, then dined at a luxurious restaurant. Louis truly was a perfect gentleman, and thanks to his attentive care, she was able to enjoy the date to the fullest. He asked whether she wanted more bread, and she replied, "No, thank you. I'm on a diet." When he smiled and said, "But you're already cute," she suddenly felt that something was very strange. That was exactly what Wynne had said to her a few days earlier, and in that moment, she oddly felt that the two of them resembled each other, even though in reality, they were completely different. After leaving the restaurant, Celine noticed a little boy sitting on the ground crying. Seeing that he was hurting from a scrape, she used magic to heal him. The boy asked in amazement how she had done it, but she only smiled and told him to keep it a secret. Standing behind her and watching everything, Louis was captivated by her kindness. When she returned home, Adele hurried over to Celine, panicked as she said that something had happened to Wynne. Celine found the boy lying in bed, in so much pain that he couldn't move. The doctor explained that by the time he arrived to examine him, Wynne had already been in that state. He realized that Wynne had been trying to suppress the progression of the curse for a long time. It seemed there was no other way now. Celine began to despair. As a day passed, Wynne's condition was clearly worsening rapidly, and he had to endure excruciating pain. She gave him holy water, but it had no effect at all. It was only a matter of time before Wynne died. She knew he had been trying to hide his pain, and she felt guilty for not noticing sooner. Jenna entered the room and reminded Celine that tomorrow she had to go to the cathedral to be evaluated by the archbishop. The maid worried for her lady, since she had not eaten anything since yesterday. Celine understood that just sitting here would accomplish nothing, but she couldn't bear to leave Wynne's side for even a moment. Jenna then said she would bring over the guidebooks for preparing for the cathedral ceremony, along with a light meal, so that her lady could stay beside Wynne. There were countless detailed rules and forms of etiquette to follow, such as how to greet people and how to walk inside the cathedral. While reading, Celine came across a passage about the goddess's power. It was said that the goddess had once used her power to save a king. At first, the king had been cursed by an evil dragon, but that curse had been broken by the goddess's power. That made her wonder whether her own ability might affect curses as well. Celine tightly held Win's hand and prayed for his curse to disappear. As if casting a healing spell, light began to spread around their hands, and she felt her whole body ache and burn. Celine knew Win had endured far too much suffering, and she absolutely had to save him. Little by little, the curse gradually weakened. Thoughts of him filled her mind. All she wanted was for him to be happy. The next morning, Celine woke up to see the tearful eyes of her younger sister and Jenna. While trying to break Win's curse, she had lost consciousness. Celine let out a relieved sigh when she heard that the symptoms of the curse had eased. But Adele was angry at her sister for using the goddess's power until she fainted, and Celine promised she would not do it again. She apologized for making her sister worry. On the way home from the temple, Celine's father was not pleased. The archbishop could sense a faint remnant of the goddess's power still left in her, but could barely detect any magic power at all. Celine understood that was because she had used up all of her magic the day before to heal Win. But she did not tell that to the archbishop or to her father. Seeing that Win was able to sit up now, she immediately ran over and hugged him tightly. But then Celine suddenly realized that Win's eyes had, for some reason, turned golden. She remembered Jenna once saying that golden eyes were proof of royal blood. Seeing that they were exactly like Louis's eyes, she asked him whether he was the second prince. It made perfect sense because both Win and the second prince were cursed. But in the original novel, Celine had never had anything to do with the second prince. She had never imagined something like this could happen. It was said that magic often showed itself through the eyes. Perhaps the reason his eyes had been black all this time was the curse. And the reason Win seemed to dislike Louis was because of the hatred he held toward him. According to the novel, the second prince's life had truly been tragic. Just thinking about it made Celine's heart ache painfully. She apologized for not realizing sooner what he had been suffering through as she held him tightly. Win also apologized for not telling her the truth, but she understood. If it were discovered that he was still alive, they would surely try to kill him again. He told her Wilfred Percival. That was his real name. It was also the name that appeared in the novel. He asked whether she still liked him, but she firmly told him that she would always love him. Celine did not care at all about his identity or background. Those words made him feel indescribably relieved. He held her tightly and whispered, "I like you, Sister Celine. I love you. I want to stay by your side forever." And she replied that they would always be together. She would always protect him, and she would not let him live a life consumed by hatred, like in the novel. She told him that for the time being, he had to be careful and not let anyone see his eyes, even though she knew that could not be hidden forever. When it was time to sleep, Win hugged the teddy bear Celine had given him, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. His mind was filled only with thoughts of wanting to see her. He quietly slipped out of his room. On the way, he accidentally overheard Jenna telling Adele that day, Celine had used up all of her goddess power to save him. Win then learned that if his sister had used all her power on a cursed orphan child without permission, she would be in serious trouble, and the one who would bear responsibility would be their father. Adele said sadly that Celine was supposed to become queen and be loved by all the people in the kingdom. Win felt deeply guilty. He blamed himself for causing the person he cherished most to face so much trouble. He did not want Celine to hate him. He wanted to become someone useful to her. He wanted Celine to love him. He recalled when she had once told him that she was waiting for her prince to appear. Then he suddenly understood. There was something only he could do for her. The next morning, when Celine entered his room, she saw him being helped by the maids as he got dressed. She had no idea what was happening, nor did she understand why he was not hiding his eyes. Win calmly told her that he was going to the imperial palace. He said that now he was mature, grown up, and no longer weak. So now their roles were reversed, and he addressed her as you while calling himself like an older man. Celine's mind went blank as Win continued explaining that he wanted to become a prince. She hurriedly begged him not to, saying it could be very dangerous. But he had already made up his mind long ago. The Duke walked in and told Celine that everything was fine and that one would not be returning for half a year. She could not understand what was going on at all, nor why her father was personally escorting one away. Win looked at her and apologized. After Celine calmed down, her father explained that Prince Wilfred Percival had come to. At first, the Duke had been shocked, but when he looked into Wilfred's eyes, he knew it was a truth that could not be denied. Celine lowered her head in remorse for having lied to both her father and the Archbishop. He told her to raise her head, saying he understood why she had been forced to lie in that situation. He also admitted that he had never been the kind of father she could easily open her heart to. Celine could sense that perhaps he carried guilt toward her. After that, he said they had to keep her goddess powers secret, because deceiving the Archbishop would be extremely troublesome. That man held power in the Holy Temple equal even to the king's. Celine let out a sigh of relief when she learned that the engagement with Louis would not happen. If they brought Wilfred back right now, it was highly likely that people would discover it was Celine's power that had healed him. So, the Duke decided to hide Wynne for 6 months, then pretend that the curse had naturally faded with time. But thinking of that short period, Celine guessed that once Wynne went to the Imperial Palace, he would never return here again. She worried that from now on, she would no longer be able to see him as often as before. None of this had ever appeared in the novel. She had no idea what his future would become. A week later, Louis sent Celine an invitation to meet him privately for a one-on-one conversation. Suddenly, he asked why she had lied and claimed that she did not possess the goddess's power. He had seen with his own eyes the stone she purified, and he had also seen her heal the child's wound when they had gone out together. She tried to lie, saying that day she had only healed a very tiny scratch, but Louis was clearly not convinced. Then she asked him why he was angry, and he replied that he was not angry at all. Even so, even Celine could tell that Louis, who was always calm and gentle, looked unusually tense today. Then Louis admitted that he thought Celine had lied because she did not want to be engaged to him. Celine immediately replied that of course that was not true. On the contrary, she thought he was an incredibly wonderful person. He had always treated her kindly, no matter how unpleasant she had once been. When he smiled and said he was glad to hear that, his dazzling handsomeness nearly made her heart give out. Celine was stunned when he said that he wanted to be engaged to her. She could not believe it. Celine had done nothing at all to make him like her more. She asked why, and Louis answered that she was very adorable. The way she smiled made it impossible for him to look away. He also admired her honesty and diligence. She was completely caught off guard by those words. It was an even better reason than anything she had ever imagined. Celine had never had a man say such things to her before, so she did not know how to react. No matter what, Louis said that he would do his very best to win her heart. He leaned down, gently inhaled the scent of her hair, and promised that he would see her again. 6 months later, they saw Wynne off on his journey. In the end, Celine still could not prepare herself for this moment, so she burst into tears. Wynne said that he loved her, and as he left, she held in her heart the wish that he would be happy. From the carriage window, he turned back to look at her. He softly said, "I can't wait for the day I make you mine alone." A month later, Celine's father returned from the trip in which he had escorted Wynne. Wynne was doing well and was being thoroughly trained in both academics and swordsmanship. Celine asked when she would be able to see Wynne again, and he said that she would no longer be allowed to meet Prince Wilfred. It sounded serious, but that was because the existence of Wilfred Percival would be kept secret until he turned 18, which meant 6 more years. Celine wondered whether it was because someone had previously tried to assassinate him, or because he had not yet been educated as a true prince. Her father told her not to worry. They had promised to take very good care of Wynne. He reassured her that the royal family had circumstances outsiders could never fully understand. Hearing that they would at least still be allowed to exchange letters, she felt a little relieved. Celine began writing letters with only one wish. That one would always be happy. Later, at Wynne Lamina's birthday party, she decided to step out onto the balcony for some fresh air. But there she ran into Prince Louis. Since Wynne had left, she had not seen Louis again. The two of them looked out together at the dazzling lights of the city, and she learned that even Louis did not get to see Wynne often. Wynne's existence was being carefully hidden, even within the Imperial Palace. She told Prince Louis that Wynne was like a lovely younger brother to her, and he quietly repeated, "A younger brother?" while recalling the expression on Wynne's face every time he looked at her. During a tea gathering with her younger sister, Celine received a letter from Wilfred. The letter read, "Dear Celine, how have you been lately? I'm doing well. I'm studying very hard. I miss you. I think of you day and night. I love you, sister." She thought he was truly far too adorable. She loved him very much. She noticed that Wilfred's handwriting had improved, proving that he was studying very seriously. She decided that she too would do her best, so that the next time they met, she could be proud of herself. For the next 6 years, she studied, trained in magic, and exercised. At the same time, she continued exchanging letters with Wilfred. Then the day finally came when Jenna announced that the carriage was ready to take her to the Imperial Palace. Was everyone ready to see him again after the time skip? But if you want to see it, be sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Based on the handwriting and the contents of Wynn's letters, Celine felt that he was much smarter than she was now. She had heard that both his swordsmanship and his magic were superior to anyone else's age. Now 19 years old, Celine had studied hard and successfully lost weight, though there had also been a period when she gained some of it back. She got along well with her family. Louis and Adele still were not in love despite all her efforts. As long as Adele was happy, that was enough for her. She did not mind too much, but she would still be sad if she could never see the main couple from her favorite novel fall in love. On the other hand, Louis seemed to have feelings for her instead, and he was no longer hiding it from others either. Because of that, rumors that the two of them were about to be engaged had spread throughout noble society. He had grown up far too handsome, to the point that her heart could hardly bear it. Even so, she still did not truly understand what love was. On top of that, her goddess power had grown stronger day by day. Now she was able to control it perfectly. At last, the day she would meet him again had come. Wynn had turned 18 just last week. His debut banquet would soon be held at the Imperial Palace. When she arrived at the castle to meet him, Celine was a little tired because she had been too excited since the day before. She had barely slept at all. She woke up when she heard someone call her name. And when she realized it was Wynn, she instinctively threw her arms around him. But when she looked at him up close, she could not help but be stunned. She thought he was absurdly handsome now. Celine began stepping back, which made him sadly ask whether he looked different from what she had imagined. But she said that was not it. She was simply surprised by how strikingly handsome he had become. After that, when asked whether he had become her ideal prince yet, she truly did not understand what he meant by that. But she humored him and answered that he looked wonderful. That instantly made his face light up. Now Wynn even knew how to say such sweet things, leaving Celine unsure how to deal with him. In a way, he made her feel as though he had become a complete stranger. Their moment was interrupted when a maid brought in tea. Luckily for Celine, she truly needed a little time to calm her heart. But while they talked, he told her that he had worked ceaselessly, even sacrificing sleep. All of it was because he had a goal, something he longed for with all his heart. Her letters had given him tremendous motivation. Celine was very surprised to learn that Wynn had reread them hundreds of times over the past 6 years. There had not been a single day when he had not thought of her. From morning to night, her image was always in his mind. Although she felt cherished, she could not help thinking that he must have been very lonely living here. Celine tried to reassure Wynn that once he made his debut, he would surely become popular very quickly, and then all the beautiful young ladies would set their sights on him. But Wynn said it was enough if she loved him. He did not care about any other woman. She thought perhaps his past experiences had made him afraid of people. This seemed like it would become a repeating pattern between the two of them. The clock struck 8, and Celine had to return home. But Wynn did not want her to leave. Looking at her with timid eyes, he quietly asked, "Celine, do you love me?" And Celine answered yes, that she loved him and always would. When he rubbed his head against her arm, she could only find him strangely adorable. She had been very worried before coming here, but she could feel that he was still the same little boy from before. Until he said, "But my feelings are different from yours." She did not really understand what he meant, but he did not seem to mind that. He only wanted her to remain exactly as she was now. Wynn leaned close to her cheek and whispered that he would slowly tell her one day. She jolted back, her face turning bright red, and asked why he had done that. Wynn reminded her that in the past, whenever he was about to sleep, she had done the same thing to him. She thought this was completely different from back then, wasn't it? He asked if that meant she disliked it, and she stammered, "And no, it's not that I dislike it." So Wynn happily said that was great. From now on, they would do that more often. Wynn wrapped Celine in another tight embrace, making her think that his sense of personal distance was truly abnormal. Perhaps because he had been isolated from people for so long, he no longer knew what normal was. Celine told herself that perhaps it was her responsibility to teach him that. Their next meeting would be 1 week later at his debut banquet. Holding his hand, she told him that from now on, he deserved a peaceful and happy life. Suddenly, Wynn's face darkened. He softly repeated, "Peaceful." There was something in that tone that somehow felt suffocating. When she asked whether something was wrong, Wynne merely smiled and brushed it off. As she left the castle, just thinking of the things Wynne had said was enough to make her heart burn hot. Prince Louis called out to Celine, and she turned around. He asked what had brought her here, and she explained that she had come to visit Wynne. That was not the answer he had been hoping for. He wondered why her face was so flushed, while Celine shyly turned away and stammered, A few things happened. As he walked her to the gate, he said that next time she should come visit him too, since he was always the one to visit her first. Neither of them realized that Wynne was standing at a distance, watching them. His face clearly showed anger and disgust. He thought to himself, how irritating. At dinner, Celine happily told her family about the time she had spent with Wynne. She truly hoped that Wynne would become an important member of her family. At the same time, a man lay collapsed at Wynne's feet, coughing up blood. That man called Wynne a monster, and Wynne replied, "A few weaklings like this aren't enough to kill a monster," before stomping down on him. Wynne realized that lately, things like this had been happening more and more often. It was probably because the day of his debut was drawing near. With the backing of Duke Eldridge, he was treated with the respect due a prince, but his life had been targeted countless times. He knew it was the Queen's doing, as she had always hated his existence. He also suspected that his father, the king, had quietly allowed it. He had survived until now thanks to the immense dark magic power born from the curse. Thinking back on it, it was ironic, since that very power had once threatened his life. Wynne swore that he would kill each and every one of them. He would never forgive the people who had treated him so cruelly. But Wynne did not want Celine to see this filthy side of him. Wynne did not want to make her worry. He only wanted Celine to love him. The thought that he could give her a peaceful and happy life filled him with joy. On the day of the banquet, Celine stood before the mirror, quietly admiring her beautiful face. She thought to herself how unfortunate it was that the Celine in the novel had lived her whole life in that overweight body. Her heart pounded with both happiness and nervousness. At last, the kingdom would acknowledge Wynne as the second prince. In the novel, he had once tried to kill the king, Louis, and Adele, and only until the very end was he not acknowledged as the second prince. This future was completely different from what had been written in Love, the goddess. She believed that everything would work out in the end. When she saw Wynne at the party, Celine realized that he was surrounded by young ladies. That was only natural, since he was far too handsome. But still, even though he was surrounded by countless girls trying to talk to him, he only seemed to truly light up when he saw Celine. The two exchanged extremely polite greetings. Here, she had to address him as Prince Fresh. She could not act too familiar with him at this event. She left, saying that she would see him again later. Meanwhile, Wynne reached out toward her with a lingering, wistful gaze. Right after that, Celine saw her father talking with the Queen. She could not hear what they were saying, but the Queen thanked him for giving her such a despicable gift. Celine had no idea that they were secretly mocking each other. Still, she could sense that the Queen did not seem pleased with Wynne. Although her face looked very much like Louis's, perhaps because she was his birth mother, her personality seemed completely different. Noticing Celine's presence, the Queen decided to make polite conversation. She said that she had heard her son mention Celine many times and hoped that she would take good care of him. Although it did not seem that the Queen disliked her, Celine still felt that she should be a little more careful. As the party continued, Celine was suddenly pulled away. Wynne signaled for her to stay quiet. He said this was the only way he could talk to her. He confessed that out there, he was so tense that he felt exhausted. Celine thought that made sense, since he had grown up in isolation all his life. She praised him for trying so hard and patted his head as she spoke. Suddenly, he pulled her close into his arms. Resting his head on her shoulder, he whispered, just for a little while, "Then I'll be able to keep fulfilling my duties again." She thought that he had always been a gentle person who liked being loved that way. She had no idea that Louis was standing on the opposite balcony, coldly staring at them with contempt in his eyes. Meanwhile, Wynne curled his lips into a faint smirk, as if declaring that he had won. Leaving the party as night fell, Celine was suddenly bumped into by a girl. The girl hurriedly apologized, and Celine could not help but stare in shock, because her beauty was like that of a living doll. Celine thought to herself that the royal nobility truly had far too many beauties. And while the girl also thought that Celine was very beautiful, her maid spoke up, saying that her lady was even more beautiful. The girl agreed and said that of course she was. There was no one more beautiful than her. Once she married, she would become part of this country. She could hardly wait to meet Prince Fresh, her future fiancé. On another day, when Louis visited the Eldridge estate, Celine did not expect him to bring along the very girl she had bumped into on the night of Wynn's debut party. The girl introduced herself as Cordelia Dowswell, the third daughter of Duke Dowswell from a neighboring country. Celine wondered why Prince Louis had brought her here. It turned out that Lady Cordelia had only just arrived in the kingdom and had been complaining to Louis, her childhood friend, that she did not have a single friend here. Louis told her that he would introduce her to someone truly wonderful. When Cordelia said she wanted to be friends, Celine saw her as a lovely, adorable girl. But she never expected Cordelia to say that she had come here as Prince Wulfresh's fiancée. Celine had not realized that Wynn was already old enough for that. She wished he had told her about it sooner. Lady Cordelia spoke enthusiastically about Wulfresh. She loved his cold expressions and calm demeanor. That left Celine completely baffled. She had never once seen Wynn act cold. A little later, after Celine walked the two of them out, Louis told her that he did not know how much longer he could wait for their engagement ceremony. Louis wanted to respect Celine's feelings, but the one he truly wanted had always been her. Celine was at a loss over what she should do. On another day, Wynn visited the Duke of Eldridge's estate. He recalled the time he had once lived there and realized that Celine's room seemed not to have changed at all. She said she had been very surprised when she heard that he was engaged, and when she found out what Prince Louis had said about him and Lady Cordelia, Wynn immediately became angry. He pushed her back against where she was sitting and said furiously that it was driving him mad. When asked Celine why she thought he had willingly left to live in the royal palace, Celine answered nervously that she had thought he wanted to reclaim his place as a prince. But no, that was only a means to an end. He had no interest at all in status or money. Wynn touched her face. He said it was because he wanted her to belong entirely to him. Jenna and Adele had always said that Celine was terrible at reading a man's heart, but Wynn had made everything painfully clear. What he felt for her was not familial affection, nor was it friendship. He looked a little tired, but his eyes shone when he saw her. In the end, he admitted that he had wanted to explain everything to her slowly, bit by bit. But he could not. It was all because of Louis. Celine was stunned. This was not the Wynn she knew. She clenched her hands tightly, feeling a little afraid. Realizing that, he immediately softened his voice to reassure her. He never wanted to make her sad. The only thing he had ever wanted was to see her smile. Since childhood, she had been everything to him. He loved her deeply as a woman. Celine panicked, not knowing what she should do. All this time, she had never realized how he felt about her. Celine had only thought that one liked her as an older sister. But now she understood that he had returned to the royal palace to reclaim his identity as a prince worthy of her status. Celine apologized for having been so oblivious to the love he had given her for 6 whole years. Oblivious to all his efforts, even though he had always been alone. Celine thought that it was only natural for Wynn to become angry when she brought up his engagement to another woman. In return, he apologized for his jealousy earlier, but desperately begged her to make sure that she did not have feelings for Louis. He was desperate. He did not want her to become engaged to his older brother. He was desperate because he was afraid of being abandoned. He would not let that happen. He could not live without Celine. Celine felt responsible because she was the one who had found him that day and changed his fate. Celine wanted Wynn to be happy and wanted to stay by his side. Her feelings for him were different from the love he felt for her, but she still loved him. He was someone incredibly important to her. Celine hugged Wynn tightly and told him not to worry, because she would never abandon him. Like a little puppy, he looked at her with delight and asked, "Really? Forever? Forever and ever?" Even so, the two of them were still caught in a deadlock, because Celine, as the eldest daughter of a duke, still carried the duty of doing what was best for her family. That meant marrying Prince Louis. Wynn had the duty of a prince, which meant marrying whoever his family chose for him. Under his breath, he muttered that he wished everyone above him would just disappear. Then no one would be left to stand in their way. Celine could not understand what he meant when she was informed that the carriage was ready. Wynn pulled Celine close and whispered that he was completely serious. He was willing to do anything for a future with her. And from now on, Wynn wanted Celine to look at him as a man. He gently kissed her on the cheek, and Celine blushed, hurriedly stepping back as she returned to her residence. Wynn was welcomed by Richard, a marquis he had met at the previous party. They decided to join hands because the two of them shared the same goal: At present, Wynne still did not have enough power of his own, so he was forced to make use of everything he could. Richard was the talkative type and far more overly familiar than Wynne liked. The two discussed how Prince Louis was interfering with Wynne. According to Richard, Louis looked immature and harmless, but in truth, he was secretly keeping Wynne confined and preventing him from getting close to Celine. Louis seemed to have an abnormal obsession with her. Wynne gave a faint, cold laugh. He was still grateful to Louis for driving away those who approached Celine during the years he had been trapped in the castle. But now he no longer needed that. The two young men already had a plan to destroy this country as soon as possible. At the ducal residence, her younger sister Adele realized that ever since Wynne's most recent visit, her sister had been absent-minded all the time. She told Celine not to worry, that if anything was weighing on her heart, she would do her very best to help. Celine truly felt blessed to have such a gentle younger sister. Then, all of a sudden, Adele asked whether Wynne had confessed to her yet, leaving Celine stunned. She could not believe her sister knew about it, but Adele thought that anyone could tell just by seeing the way Wynne had acted that day. Even their parents had probably already noticed. Celine felt embarrassed, because it seemed that she alone had been the only one who failed to realize it. 6 years ago, her mental age had been 20, while Wynne had only been 12, so thinking of Wynne in that way had felt very strange to her. But now that he had grown up, she could no longer clearly feel that age gap. At this point, Celine admired marriages based on love, but she still intended to accept a marriage for the sake of her family. No matter what, she would stay by Wynne's side. Celine felt that he needed her right now, not for his whole life, but perhaps only long enough for him to overcome the emotional instability born from his traumatic childhood. Things quickly became complicated when Celine, Wynne, Louis, and Cordelia had tea together. When Cordelia clung affectionately to Wynne, even though he was colder than usual, Celine felt deeply uneasy. So uneasy that her entire body went cold. Louis immediately draped his coat over her shoulders to keep her warm. And although Celine accepted it out of courtesy, she knew it would only make Wynne angrier. Meanwhile, Cordelia only added fuel to the fire by calling Prince Louis and Lady Celine a perfectly well-matched couple. Things became so bad that Wynne dropped his teacup and it shattered on the floor. Celine had no idea how she was supposed to survive this nightmare of tangled relationships. Wynne reached down to pick up the broken pieces and cut himself badly. A great deal of blood flowed. Cordelia screamed in panic at the sight. Celine, meanwhile, immediately rushed to his side and crouched down to inspect the deep wound. She could not use her goddess powers in front of everyone, so she quickly took him outside to treat him herself. Louis and Cordelia completely failed to notice the faint, meaningful smile that briefly crossed Wynne's lips. Celine used magic to heal him, then carefully wrapped the wound so it would still look as if it had not completely healed to avoid suspicion. She thought back over everything that had happened. She had been invited to Princess Cordelia's residence for tea, but she had no idea that Wynne and Louis would be there too. Wynne had only come because Cordelia told him that Celine would be coming, and he himself had not known that Louis would appear. Looking at Wynne's bandaged hand, Celine thought that cut must have hurt terribly. But he said it was fine because seeing Louis touch her hurt him far more. He decided to disinfect Louis's germs by kissing the back of her hand, making her whole body flush hot. Celine wondered where on earth he had learned such things. She thought that she should not let Wynne keep depending on her so much, and that they also needed to consider Cordelia's feelings. She told Wynne that they could not keep doing things like this anymore. He immediately asked, "Why? Don't you like me?" She grew flustered and hurriedly said that of course she liked him. She was only doing this for his own good. She thought it would be best if the two of them kept a normal distance from each other. But he would not accept that and pressed her, asking what exactly normal meant. Wynne said that he only needed her. She was the only special person in his life. Just then, Celine was rescued by a knock at the door and Cordelia asking whether they were all right. When they returned, Cordelia mentioned that next month, her engagement to Wynne would probably be officially confirmed. Wynne himself had never heard anything about that, while Cordelia insisted that she had heard it from the Queen herself. Cordelia turned to ask Celine whether she would come congratulate them, and the atmosphere instantly became unbearably awkward. Celine did not know how to answer, but fortunately, Louis saved her by saying that her carriage had arrived. Cordelia walked Celine outside, chatting politely as they went. She said that anyone could clearly see that Wynn was very fond of Celine, but said that it was all right because now Wynn belonged to her. Cordelia promised that she would support Celine's little brother from now on, and she hoped that they could become good friends. Meanwhile, Celine was struggling with a strange feeling in her heart. Just imagining Wynn and Cordelia together made her chest ache with pain. Back inside, Lewis removed the bandage from Wynn's hand to confirm that the wound had healed completely. Wynn stormed off in anger, thinking that he had to act quickly, or else Lewis would steal Celine from him. As for Lewis, he found Celine both foolish and adorable. Lewis silently vowed that he would not let Celine escape from him, no matter how hard she tried to run or hide. After that, Celine was informed by her father that next weekend, she would accompany him to the royal palace. It was very likely for discussions about her engagement to Prince Louis. She knew that no matter how much her father respected her feelings, there was no way for her to refuse Louis. Lately, she had been constantly asking herself whether hiding her goddess powers was truly the right thing to do, because she could absolutely use them to save many people. She could save those who were suffering like Wynn, and if she married Louis, she would no longer need to hide that power. Seeing Celine so downcast, Adele decided to take her out for tea to cheer her up. Afterward, the two of them strolled around town and ran into Wynn. The moment he saw Celine, he immediately lit up and ran over to hug her. Celine was happy that he was still the same Wynn as always. Richard promptly scolded Wynn for running off and leaving him behind so quickly. Then he quickly took Celine's hand to introduce himself. Richard was even about to kiss the back of her hand, but Wynn immediately smacked his hand away, while Adele stepped in front to shield her sister. After Celine introduced herself and her sister, Richard went all out to flatter them, lavishly praising the two sisters as even more beautiful than the rumors said. When Celine learned that Richard and Wynn were close friends, according to Richard himself, she was overjoyed to hear that Wynn had finally made a friend and praised Wynn endlessly right in front of him. Wynn looked rather uncomfortable, and Celine found a sight of him blushing absolutely adorable. The four of them had lunch together. During the meal, when Celine said that Richard must be very popular with women, he casually replied that Lady Adele was exactly his type. Even so, Adele did not seem particularly interested in him. After that, Wynn told Celine to open her mouth and try to feed her, which made her feel that this was really not okay. Her engagement to Louis was about to be decided, but she did not want to ruin the mood right then. Besides, Wynn's face looked far too adorable, so in the end, she still took a bite. Wynn then told Adele that he needed to do something and asked whether she could come with him. That was yet another happy moment for Celine. It was the first time Wynn had voluntarily asked Adele to do something for him. Taking that chance, Richard took the initiative to invite Celine on a walk with him. A little while later, the two of them happened to come across a crowd gathering. An accident had happened. Celine had a bad feeling. She hurried inside and saw Wynn lying on the ground, covered in blood. She was horrified beyond words. But what happened next was what truly left her stunned. Adele's whole body began to glow as she used the goddess's magic to heal him. Celine rushed to Wynn's side and watched with her own eyes as the wounds on his body gradually disappeared. Once Wynn was completely healed, Adele immediately collapsed. But Richard caught her in time. Seeing Wynn get back on his feet, Celine hurriedly threw her arms around him. He was still dizzy from losing too much blood. Around them, the witnesses began whispering and murmuring about how he had been healed, even though his injuries had been so severe. So they quickly left. 2 days later, Wynn came to visit Celine and explained that he had been in a carriage accident that day. Celine trembled in fear when she remembered what she had seen then. Moved, she threw herself into Wynn's arms. He wrapped an arm around her head and gently held her close. Then he gave a sly smile. Could it be that all of this had been part of Wynn and Richard's plan? The two of them discussed how surprising it was that Adele had awakened the goddess's power, and how Wynn still remembered what Celine had once said, that one day, Adele would be able to do it. She couldn't believe he still remembered, even though she had said that such a long time ago. Earlier, while she was still recovering, even Adele herself had been extremely shocked to learn that she possessed the goddess's power. The girl had only had one overwhelming desire to save Wynne, and then light suddenly burst from her hands. Celine believed that the wish to save someone had become the catalyst that awakened that power. Later, when they met again, Wynne said that he had seen Adele at the royal palace just before leaving to come here. He thought that by now, Adele was probably being urged toward a marriage arrangement with Prince Louis. Celine felt guilty because, unlike in the novel, the two of them were not in love at all. But Wynne told her not to worry, reassuring her that Louis would most likely stop it himself. This was still good news for Wynne, because at the very least it would buy him more time. Wynne was certain that his own engagement plan would also be called off, and when that happened, there would no longer be any obstacle between him and Celine. She looked worried and asked whether a decision made by the Queen herself could really be withdrawn that easily. At the same time, she also felt guilty over the stabbing pain in her chest when Cordelia said that she would take care of Wynne. He took her hand and pulled her closer. He whispered that he loved her, that he wanted to spend the rest of his life with her, and that he needed nothing else. That alone would be enough to make him happy. She found him truly adorable. And yet she still didn't understand why she couldn't shake this uneasy feeling. While talking with Richard at his residence, Wynne once again enthusiastically praised just how adorable Celine was. Richard thought Wynne really was a strange man. He could easily have died in that accident, but Wynne believed he had never truly been in danger. Even if Adele had failed to awaken her ability, he knew Celine would definitely come running to his side. Richard wondered what would happen if Celine found out that everything had been arranged by Wynne. Wynne had planned everything after reading books in the royal archives and researching the power of the goddess. He discovered that what triggered that power was the desire to save someone else. That was why he needed a life-threatening situation. It had all started from something Celine had once casually said to him when they were young. He knew she was special. Time and again, she had accurately predicted the future. Now that Adele had awakened the power of the goddess, the royal family would surely want to make her a candidate to become the prince's fiancée. Wynne himself was not afraid of brushing against death. He had endured pains far more terrible than that. He was willing to do anything to have Celine. His next task was to resolve his engagement with Cordelia. Richard pointed out that Wynne was suspiciously wary of Cordelia, but Wynne understood better than anyone that he and she were the same type of person. Richard didn't seem to care much. He merely hummed in acknowledgement, then quickly asked Wynne to support him once everything was over, because he wanted a chance with Lady Adele. That night, while Louis was drinking alone, Cordelia could tell that he was burdened with far too many thoughts. Both of them felt that something was wrong about Adele's newly awakened ability. To begin with, Louis simply could not imagine Wynne getting caught up in a carriage accident. The Queen had once complained that Wynne had personally dealt with every assassin she had sent. She thought he was terrifying and had even wished he would just die already. Louis recalled the moment when Celine learned that not only one person could possess the goddess's power. He suddenly felt uneasy when he remembered the relieved expression on her face back then. But then he told himself that perhaps he was overthinking things. Since ancient times, it had been said that when the goddess's power existed, the nation would know peace. And he was certain that his family would do whatever was necessary to obtain Adele. But the person the prince wanted was only Celine. Even he himself did not understand why. It made no sense at all. And yet Louis only wanted her to smile for him alone. Meanwhile, Cordelia couldn't stop admiring Wynne's coldness and the way he killed without hesitation. Louis could not understand what exactly she saw in someone like Wynne. But to Cordelia, it was the first time she had ever met someone like herself. While the three of them were having tea together, Adele explained to Celine and Wynne that although the Queen wanted to marry Adele to Louis, the prince himself seemed determined to confront his parents head-on. Celine was utterly surprised to hear Adele say it so bluntly. Louis was willing to put himself at a disadvantage simply because he wanted her. Celine immediately changed the subject to the royal family's annual hunting tournament. While the gentlemen went hunting, the ladies would rest and drink tea in the tents. Naturally, the men would present their prey to the woman they favored. The woman who received the finest prey would become the queen of the hunt. Last year, Louis had captured the best prey and presented it to Celine, so she had reluctantly become queen. In the novel, Wynne had used the hunt as a chance to try to kill Louis. There had also been an event where Adele had to use her goddess power to heal Louis. Celine secretly hoped that would not happen this time. Far more people attended this year than last year, especially young ladies. They were extremely interested in the fact that both princes would be participating, but the one who attracted the most attention was Adele. A few days earlier, the archbishop had officially recognized her goddess power, and from now on she would learn how to use that power for the good of the nation. Celine was startled when she heard Cordelia call her name. Even though Cordelia was speaking brightly and cheerfully, Celine was tormented by guilt, especially when Cordelia curiously wondered whether Wynne would present his prey to her this year. When the two princes appeared, the noble ladies immediately crowded around them. Wynne was every bit as famous as Louis. Soon, Cordelia ran to Wynne's side and tightly hugged his arm, saying how much she had missed him. Celine suddenly felt jealous, wondering whether their engagement might actually be real. She thought they looked truly well matched, and she couldn't understand why her chest hurt so much. Louis suddenly walked over, took Celine's hand, and promised that he would do his very best to make her his queen this year. He declared his feelings and insisted that the future of the two of them would not change. It pained her because she could not return those feelings no matter how gently he treated her. And when Wynne led her off for a private walk and held her close, she could not understand why her heart was pounding even more wildly than before. Wynne could no longer restrain his desire for more. This alone was no longer enough for him. He wanted to be with her more, to touch her more. And when Wynne drew his lips close to hers, she softly shut her eyes tight, only for him to stop. He gave a faint smile and said he was only joking, then took Celine's hand and led her back to the party. She felt strangely as though her heart was about to burst. Neither of them realized that Cordelia was watching from a distance. She sneered coldly. "Damn it. I warned you, didn't I, Lady Celine? I have no choice but to punish bad girls who dare steal what belongs to their friends." Cordelia said this with satisfaction. Behind her stood two assassins ready to carry out their task. The hunting tournament officially began. While the two sisters were watching the gentlemen show off their skills, Adele glanced over and thought Celine seemed feverish. Celine stammered and admitted that her chest hurt sharply whenever she saw Cordelia holding on to Wynne. Before Adele could explain what that feeling meant, the thing everyone would have understood, Cordelia interrupted and invited the two of them to have tea. While they were having tea, a woman approached Celine. She said she had something important to discuss with her in private regarding Prince Wynne. Celine took the bait, while Cordelia quietly smirked. As a result, Celine woke up in the middle of a desolate forest, recalling what had happened just before. She realized that she had been seized from behind while speaking with that woman. Celine had thought the conversation might be related to Wynne's past, so she had told her guards there was no need to follow. She had never imagined things would turn out like this. Startled by the rustling behind the bushes, she looked on in horror. As hooded men advanced toward her, one of them shot an arrow that grazed her cheek, leaving behind a streak of blood. Celine did not understand why this was happening, but she knew very well that she had to run. She had no idea who was behind it, but there had been absolutely no such plot in the novel either. She stumbled to the ground when an arrow sank right beside her. At that moment, Celine wondered whether he had intentionally missed. It felt as though they were toying with her, as if they were hunting prey. She was terrified beyond measure. She could use a few kinds of magic, but none of them were suited for combat. If she kept healing her wounds over and over, she would run out of mana sooner or later. In the end, she tripped again, panting as they caught up with her. It was useless now. She couldn't run anymore. The men discussed among themselves that they were now ready to kill her. They even sounded regretful, because it was rare to come across a woman as beautiful as her. They didn't want the mission to fail, so they decided they would kill her first, then have some fun with the corpse afterward. In her previous life, she would not have cared if she died. No one would have been sad if she died. But now it was different. There were people who cared about her, people she loved. She still didn't want to die. Crying as she prayed in despair, she desperately begged for Wynne to come save her. And at that very moment, he appeared before her, glaring ferociously at the kidnappers. Wynne was deeply shaken to see the person he loved in such a desperate state. He apologized for arriving late and promised that everything would be all right. Celine told him they needed to escape, but he said there was no need. He said he would deal with them quickly. When he heard one of them say that they would finish her off and then have a little fun, Wynne flew into a violent and terrifying rage unlike anything Celine had ever seen from him. Then Wynne coldly spat out, "Die, you bastards," and used dark magic to burn them in excruciating pain. Celine could clearly feel the cold, gloomy, negative aura radiating from him. When one of the men crawled to his feet, groaning that he could not breathe, Wynne said that was the price he had to pay, and that he would make them suffer pain even worse than death before finally killing them. But then Wynne decided to kill that man first because he was too noisy. The man's blood splattered everywhere, even onto Celine's face. She froze as she watched Wynne, the gentle Wynne she knew, murder someone. Wynne continued making the others suffer increasingly unbearable agony under the force of his magic, and he was truly enjoying it. Celine could not believe her eyes. At that moment, he looked no different from the cruel second prince in the novel. He turned to her with a smile, apologizing for being so angry that he could not control himself. A chill ran down Celine's spine when Wynne said that now he would finish off the rest of them. She quickly grabbed the leg of his trousers and begged him not to. He asked why, when they had tried to kill her and had even harbored such filthy thoughts afterward. Then he quickly misunderstood, thinking that perhaps she wanted to leave at least one of them alive to question who had hired them. So he decided he would deal with one and take the other back. Celine suddenly realized that all this time, she had thought everything had become different from the novel. She had simply assumed that Wynne no longer longed for revenge. But now she understood that there was no way he could ever forget all the pain he had endured. She felt ashamed of how thoughtless she had been when she said he deserved a peaceful, happy life, when now she had seen with her own eyes that there were always people who wanted to take his life. Celine stood up, looked at the body he had tortured, then gritted her teeth and gathered all her courage to heal the man immediately. Wynne could not understand why Celine would do that after knowing full well what they had intended to do to her. She told him that she truly had been terrified and that she would never forgive them, but they had to be punished according to the kingdom's laws. She did not want Wynne to become a cruel man like in the novel. Suddenly, she threw her arms around him and thanked him for saving her life. He wrapped his arms around her in return, though she was still trembling, though she felt on the verge of tears. But no matter what, she would not let Wynne follow the novel script. She would do everything she could to make him happy. 2 weeks passed. The attackers had been handed over to the royal army. Unfortunately, they had been placed under a spell that prevented them from revealing who had hired them, so the true culprit still had not come to light. The attempted murder of a duke's daughter was a grave matter, and so the hunting tournament was canceled. Her father strictly forbade her from going out or receiving visitors until Wynne came to see her. He looked terribly downcast and asked whether she hated him now. Surprised, Celine asked why Wynne would think that, and only then learned that after the incident, she had not looked at him even once. And the weekly letters she always sent had suddenly stopped for the past 2 weeks as well. Celine had been so dazed that she had failed to notice Wynne's letter among the countless messages of concern and comfort she had received. In Wynne's eyes, Celine saw sadness, like that of an abandoned child. She hurriedly apologized. He, meanwhile, was relieved because he said that if he lost her feelings, he would rather die. Wynne brought up again that Celine disliked seeing him kill and promised that from now on he would be more careful. But he also wanted her to understand that there were situations where it was kill or be killed. Celine fell silent in shock. She realized he must be referring to his life in the imperial palace. Celine suddenly thought that perhaps, for Wynne, in many situations that kind of act was simply self-defense. She promised that she would never hate him, but still begged him not to do anything dangerous. Celine knew she was not strong enough to protect Wynne, but she still wanted to stay by his side and support him in any way she could. And then he confessed that ever since he left the Duke's estate as a child, he had been in life-threatening situations more than once. They had poisoned him. Servants who had once been very close to him had betrayed him. But Wynne had kept silent because he did not want her to worry. As long as she was by his side, he was happy. He did not care about anyone else. And now he wanted something more certain than Celine's vague support. Wynne wanted the two of them to get engaged. Her lips trembled when she heard him say that he wanted to stay by her side as her fiancée. When she asked about Cordelia, he said she was nothing but a stranger arranged by the queen, and that Cordelia was most likely the one who had tried to kill her. Celine did not want to believe it, but Wynne promised he would soon find proof. He also firmly stated that Cordelia had no romantic feelings for him at all. He neither liked nor trusted anyone but Celine. Wynne then suggested that if he avoided becoming engaged to Cordelia, would that make her feel more at ease being by his side? Celine's instinctive step backward made Wynne look hurt. Then he said, "So you lied when you said you would do anything for me. It's all right. I'm sorry for asking too much." I know you don't love me the way I love you. I'll go now. Ah, yes, the classic emotional manipulation of love. And Celine fell right into the trap. She immediately told him to wait. Her thoughts became a tangled mess. She wondered whether it was really for his sake to keep holding on to him half-heartedly, because what he wanted from her was no longer the same kind of relationship as before. Clearly, Wynn wanted the two of them to stay together as husband and wife for the rest of their lives. Celine wanted to stay with Wynn, but she still was not ready to go that far. And yet she also felt that if she let him walk away right now, he would disappear from her life forever. So she said outright that she would get engaged to him. But that still was not enough for Wynn. He told her to kiss him. That was the only way she could prove she was serious. Celine immediately blushed bright red. She understood what he meant, but she had never kissed anyone before. That was something only people in love did. Celine felt strangely embarrassed, but she did not reject the idea at all. Now that she had agreed to the engagement, there was no turning back. Seeing the determined look on her face, Wynn laughed softly. He closed his eyes so she could kiss him, and in that brief moment of looking at him like that, Celine suddenly thought that Wynn really did have a very handsome face. She leaned in for the kiss, and when she pulled back, she felt as if her heart were about to explode. Unexpectedly, Wynn pulled Celine back and kissed her deeply. She asked why, and he said he could not help it. Wynn thanked Celine because right now he was happier than he had ever been. He wanted them to stay together forever and said that he would always cherish her. She turned her face away. While he found it unbearably adorable that her heart was racing because of him. That night, while Wynn was torturing a man, Richard thought Wynn seemed genuinely cheerful today. When he heard that Celine had said she would get engaged to him, Richard immediately said that Wynn must have threatened her into agreeing. The more Wynn thought about it, the sadder he felt. Clearly, this had not come from mutual feelings at all. He had simply taken advantage of her kindness. Wynn had resorted to extreme measures because he was afraid she would abandon him. The moment he dealt with the kidnapper right in front of her was the first time Celine had ever looked at him with such fear. It made Wynn realize that he truly had become insane. She had looked at him as if he were some alien creature. The thought that she might hate him was even more terrifying than death, because if he could not stay by her side, he would no longer be able to keep living. Wynn had taken advantage of Celine's pity, even though he had never had any intention of leaving. Not many people knew this, but binding magic was not omnipotent. Right before a person died, there was a brief moment when that magic loosened. Wynn had discovered that by chance in the past, while torturing assassins. He forced the man being tortured to confess that the mastermind was a woman from a neighboring country with black hair and gray eyes. Wynn knew exactly who that was. He cursed her as a bitch before coldly finishing the man off. Even though that testimony was not enough to serve as proof, Wynn still felt it was enough. He could not believe the audacity of Cordelia and her accomplice for daring to target his beloved Celine. Wynn smiled savagely and swore he would kill them with his own hands. A week passed after Celine agreed to become engaged to Wynn, and he became more gentle and attentive toward her than ever before. Now she looked at him with different eyes. The way he touched her made her feel that he had become more mature. When Wynn bent down to kiss her again, Celine immediately told him to stop. They were not officially engaged yet, and she thought it was inappropriate. Celine said they needed to do everything in the proper order. But in truth, that was only an excuse because she was terribly shy. All right, Wynn agreed, but only on the condition that she give him one more kiss. Then he would behave. Celine had no choice but to indulge him. And so Wynn stole 2 kisses, and even tried to go for a third, saying they were still only in the middle of one kiss. She pouted a little, but he reassured her that it really was just one, even though he himself knew he was being shameless. Then Wynn added that once they were engaged, they could kiss as much as they wanted. Celine blushed when he looked at her with eyes full of love. After being cooped up in the house for so long, Celine felt depressed because she had gained 5 kilograms, but Wynn told her she did not need to diet. No matter what she looked like, he would love her. Wynn had loved the way Celine looked from the first moment they met. He found her incredibly adorable. He said he would still love her even if she lost both her arms and legs, or if her face were ruined. Those examples were strangely specific. Wynn even said frankly that if possible, he wished Celine would not be too pretty, because other men would be attracted to her. She thought he was so sweet. Then Celine was utterly surprised that Wynn had managed to persuade her father to allow them to go out and stroll through the capital. The outing would take place a week later, and what surprised her even more was that Wynne had invited Adele along as well. Celine was very much looking forward to the trip. She ran into Adele in the hallway, with Louis standing behind her. Adele had invited Prince Louis because the king and queen wanted the two of them to spend some time alone together. As expected, they still had not given up on trying to match Adele and Louis. Celine thought the timing was perfect, so she asked Prince Louis to speak with her privately in the drawing room. Celine said that she was very honored that Louis had chosen her as his fiancée, but at the same time made it clear that she could not return his feelings. He asked why, and she answered that she wanted to stay by Wynne's side. Louis gave a faint scoff in response. Do you really think that will make you happy? Louis liked Celine's gentleness and thoughtfulness, but in his eyes, it was nothing more than self-sacrifice, mistaking pity for love. She was about to argue, but hesitated when he asked whether she truly loved Wynne as a man. Louis reminded Celine that her dream had been to marry the person she loved, then laughed and said that staying with Wynne would only make her more and more unhappy. He could see that Wynne had taken advantage of her kindness, had taken advantage of who she was. But at that moment, Louis himself did not look any different from a desperate man. He regarded Wynne as a cruel, violent, and dangerous man. Louis warned Celine to keep her distance from Wynne, because what if one day he turned his hand against the precious loved ones dear to her? Celine knew that in the novel, Wynne had once tried to kill Adele, and she was torn inside. She did not know whether Wynne would truly become the person written in the story. In the end, she decided to defy that fate because Wynne's happiness mattered more to her than her own. When she told Louis that she would not change her decision to stay with Wynne, he only softened his voice and replied, "You poor thing. Don't worry, I'll help you realize it soon enough." Prince Louis knelt on one knee and said that he loved her, that from the very beginning, she was the only one in his heart. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Fortunately, it pulled Celine out of that suffocating moment, but Louis suddenly embraced Celine from behind. She turned around in alarm at the prince's bold action, but that only made Louis hold her even tighter. When he heard the voice outside and realized it was Wynne, Celine panicked. She did not want Wynne to see her in such an awkward situation. Louis leaned close to her ear and whispered for her to send Wynne away. She made the excuse that she had accidentally dozed off and would come out soon after changing her clothes. Louis thought he had won when he saw that Wynne believed it. Celine spun around and angrily told Louis never to do that again. Right after that, he left her stunned by saying how strange it was that Wynne had been unable to avoid the carriage accident. Louis knew that Wynne had once gone to the royal archives to investigate the goddess's power and believed that Wynne had arranged everything just to awaken Adele's power, thereby removing Celine from the position of the kingdom's future queen. Celine could not believe it. She had seen with her own eyes how severely Wynne had been injured. She tried to reassure herself that Louis was just overthinking things, that it had all merely been a coincidence. Louis ended their conversation that day, telling her she did not need to see him out because he would come back to find her again. After that, she went to find Wynne and Adele, who were discussing next week's trip. Adele hesitantly asked her sister whether she could really go with them, since this would be their first outing after officially becoming a couple. But that news left Celine stunned. She immediately asked what Wynne had said to Adele. He turned to her and calmly asked, "Aren't we a couple?" Celine did not deny it, but added that she had not yet announced that the two of them were together. Wynne remained calm and countered by asking whether Celine would kiss a man she had no feelings for. She hurriedly covered his mouth and told him not to say such things in front of Adele. Adele said it was fine, that she had not heard anything at all, even though she was covering her face instead of her ears. Taking that chance, Wynne lightly bit Celine's hand and leaned in close to ask, "So, are you my girlfriend?" Gathering all her courage, she murmured a quiet yes. Elsewhere, Cordelia felt bored after yet another session of killing. Louis knocked on her door and asked to speak with her. She replied that she would soon come to his room. Then she ordered a maid to clean up the room. The maid obediently followed her orders, as if it were an everyday task. Cordelia felt especially bored, because Will Fresh paid her no attention at all. Killing meant nothing to her if it was not for the sake of someone she liked. During the carriage ride, Lady Adele was not very pleased that Richard kept talking without pause. Their destination was Marquis Sterling's territory. Naturally, the place belonged to Richard. Since it was fairly close to the royal capital, they would arrive in 2 days. Only then did Celine understand why Wynne had invited Adele along. Richard seemed to have taken a strong liking to her. He tried to win Adele over, asking whether inviting her had inconvenienced her, but Adele did not mind. She even said that if so, he should have just said that from the start. She also thanked him for carrying her when she had fainted. That alone was enough for him to declare that from now on, he would properly ask her out on dates. When they arrived at the territory, the scenery was breathtaking. Celine had never had the chance to travel far. Not in her previous life, and not even after being reincarnated as Celine. When she said she wanted to visit Richard's parents, he only replied that he had no family, so there was no need. She did not understand what he meant by that, but while they were sitting in the tea room, Wynne realized that those words had made Celine worry. Richard was always smiling, so she had never imagined that he no longer had any family. It was even worse when Wynne explained that Richard's parents had been killed by the king. Everyone believed it had simply been an accident. But the truth was that they had been assassinated for discovering the king's crimes. Wynne did not want to say any more, because if he continued, the two girls could become targets as well. He warned them to be extremely careful around the king and queen. At the end of the day, Celine expressed her concern for Richard to her younger sister Adele. She truly thought about the time he must have spent living alone, both in the capital and in his own territory. That also explained why he had become a marquis at only 21 years old. After losing his parents, he had been forced to inherit the title. Celine reassured her sister that she thought Richard was a wonderful person. He was kind, funny, and very considerate. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, and when she learned that Wynne was outside, Adele suddenly felt that she ought to go to bed. Naturally, she left Celine and went alone together. Truly, what a priceless little sister. Celine began to worry about what might happen. Wynne sat down on the edge of the bed and asked if she was sleepy. He said he was very happy because he had been able to stay by her side all day today. Celine tried to make an excuse and go to sleep, but Wynne did not want to leave. At first she thought he was only being cute, still a bit childish like before, until he suddenly said, "Let's sleep together." She was not ready for that at all. Flustered, Celine tried to refuse, but Wynne immediately asked why. In the past, they had often slept together. Once they returned to the capital, they would no longer be able to stay together like this. And ever since he had left the Duke's estate, he had always felt afraid and lonely at night. That made her remember the lonely 12-year-old Wynne from long ago. In the end, Celine relented and said that sleeping together was fine. Wynne immediately wrapped her in a warm and gentle embrace, but the corners of his lips curled upward in a smile that was both sly and dangerous. After the lights were out, he looked at her in the darkness. Then Wynne suddenly wrapped his arms around her from behind and whispered, "Good night, Celine." But he wanted them to sleep together like this every night during the trip. Her heart pounded wildly, and Celine thought to herself that there was no way she would survive a whole week like this. And yet before long, she had fallen fast asleep like a child. When Wynne left the room, Richard immediately mocked the pervert. "What exactly were you doing in there?" With his usual teasing tone, Wynne said that he needed to return to the castle. It placed a heavy burden on his body, because teleportation spells consumed an enormous amount of magical power. Even so, he would return the next morning, placing his hand on the crystal orb when returned home. Teleportation devices were extremely valuable, and there were only a few of them on the entire continent. They required so much magic power that most people could not even use them. The next morning at breakfast, Richard blurted out that Wynne and Celine had slept together. His words made Adele blush bright red in embarrassment, not knowing how to react. Celine hurriedly stammered, "And no, we only slept in the same bed." She quickly added that when she woke up, he was not even there. Wynne smiled at her and said he had just gone out for a short walk. After that, the group decided to go out for a stroll around town, and Richard suggested splitting up because he wanted a private date with Lady Adele. At first, Adele was going to object, but when Richard said they should not disturb the two of them, she had to admit he had a point. Celine and Wynne went shopping together. She bought him a new pair of earrings, which he promised to treasure for the rest of his life. That evening, when Wynne returned to the royal palace, and Louis asked him about the time he had spent with Celine, Wynne coldly replied that it was none of his business. But Louis suddenly said that Wynne could not keep Celine bound to him forever with nothing but pity. Wynne's eyes widened at that. Louis said that he had been with Celine on the day she fainted in his room and that she had wanted to stay with him. Louis continued provoking his younger brother, telling him that he had held Celine behind the door and how adorable her shy face had looked then. Wynn completely lost control and threatened to kill Louis, black magic violently erupting around him. Meanwhile, Louis was ready to fight back as well, using his own magic to defend himself. Wynn knew very well that he could deal with Louis in an instant, but in the end he withdrew his power, thinking of how it would affect Celine. That left Louis utterly stunned. Wynn's final words before leaving were, "One day I will kill you." Celine woke up to find Wynn crying. His tears fell on her face. She asked what had happened, and he called her a cruel liar. He said she had deliberately sent him away so she could be with Louis. She did not understand how he had found out. Wynn demanded to know whether what she had said about wanting to stay with him forever had all been a lie. But Celine insisted that she had been completely sincere. He kept asking whether Louis had held her. When she tried to explain, he only repeated over and over, "No, no, no. You said you would marry me. Then why? Why did you betray me? Answer me." She blamed herself for not telling him the truth that day. Then he asked again if Louis begged for a kiss. Would she give him one? He was nearly insane with resentment, pain, and despair, and her heart clenched. Then suddenly he told her to kiss him to make him feel better. She knew perfectly well that this was not right, but in the end she still did as he asked. She truly did not know whether it was the right thing to do, but she still wanted to do anything she could to please him. As the two embraced, he told her that from now on, she must never let any other man touch her again. Then he held her tightly and kissed her once more. By noon, Adele had started to worry because Celine and Wynn still had not come out of the room. She had heard them arguing all night. When Wynn stepped outside, Richard immediately asked where Celine was. Wynn told everyone not to worry. They just wanted to stay together a little longer, and he did not want anyone disturbing them. Celine's mind was full of questions, such as why Louis had told Wynn about that day, and how the two of them had even been in contact when Louis was all the way in the capital. She had never seen Wynn cry like that before. He returned to the room and asked if she was all right. Then he asked whether she hated him. As she had so many times before, she said of course not, and apologized to him again. She swore that from now on, she would not hide anything from him ever again. At first, she really had wanted to save him out of pity, because his circumstances overlapped so much with her previous life, when she had been sick and died in loneliness. But over time, she found herself happy watching him gradually open up to her. Celine liked that Wynn relied only on her. She found it adorable when he straightforwardly told her that he loved her. Perhaps, deep down somewhere, Celine had always longed to become someone's number one. Maybe it was not only him depending on her. Perhaps she herself had come to depend on him too, without realizing it. When they returned to the capital, Celine wanted to find out what exactly Louis was plotting. She did not want him hurting Wynn any further. On the final night of this vacation, Wynn told Richard that the first thing he would do after returning was deal with Cordelia. After that, the king and the queen. And finally, he would strip Louis of everything. He knew that simply dealing with Cordelia would not be enough to make Celine feel safer. He needed Celine to realize that Cordelia was the one behind everything. He knew she was the type who took pleasure in killing. Recently, a servant's corpse had been discovered in the castle. He was certain Cordelia was responsible. When they got home, Celine showed off the new bracelet Adele had given her. But Adele could not take all the credit, because Richard had been the one who helped her choose the gift. Just hearing his name made Adele blush red. The two of them had gone out together, while Celine had been shut in the room with Wynn all day, and it was then that they had bought the gift for her. Celine praised her younger sister's earrings, and Adele shyly said that Richard had given them to her. It was the first time Adele had ever worn something gifted by a man. She also said it was Richard's first time loving someone. It turned out Richard had fallen for her at first sight, and the more he got to know Adele, the more he loved her. Now he truly wanted the two of them to marry. How wonderful, how unbelievably sweet. Celine had no idea their relationship had progressed this far. As an older sister, she wanted to give her younger sister proper advice, but she could not because she herself had no experience in love at all. Adele worried that Richard was only teasing her, but Celine could see very clearly and assured her that Sir Richard was a sincere man. Celine felt as if she had never seen Adele like this before. Perhaps this was also her first love. Richard did not even appear in the original novel. After talking with Celine, Adele felt much more positive and decided to accept his invitation to dinner next week. A little later, Celine received Lady Wilhelmina after getting a letter from her asking to meet. It had been 3 years since the last time they had seen each other, because Wilhelmina had gone abroad to study. Wilhelmina asked whether Celine had fallen for anyone yet. And although the answer was no, Celine still admitted that she had promised herself to become engaged to someone she truly cared about. When she learned that person was Wilfresh Percival, Wilhelmina immediately glanced around the room to make sure no one was listening, then leaned close to Celine's ear and whispered that she had to be careful of Cordelia. During her studies in a neighboring country, she had heard many things about Cordelia. Anyone who got close to her eventually turned up dead. In a secluded cabin deep in the forest, Cordelia looked very surprised that Wilfresh had invited her there. She wondered what he intended to do to her in this desolate forest. She embraced him from behind. Cordelia teased, "It's just the two of us here in this lonely forest." "I'm so excited." Wilfresh calmly said that she was the one who had tried to murder Celine in this forest. Cordelia let out a soft sigh. "I can't believe that at a time like this, you're talking about another woman." She even said she had thought Celine looked very cute that day, and what a pity it was that he had interfered. Those words made Wilfresh cast a terrifyingly cold glance at her, but Cordelia only seemed delighted. She reached up and held Wynn's face, asking why he had called her here. In the next instant, he pressed the edge of his sword to her throat. With a faint smile, he said, "I called you here to give you a one-way ticket to the grave." Cordelia answered with a faint, amused smile. The story returned to Wilhelmina. The young lady said that all the people who had once been close to Cordelia had been torn apart, as though they had been used for someone's amusement. That made fear rise in Celine's heart. She wondered whether Wynn's warning had been right. Celine suddenly went to the royal palace without prior notice, and a servant informed her that Wynn was not available to receive her. She knew it was terribly rude to visit royalty without an appointment, but the unease in her heart would not let her hold back. So she had slipped out of the house without asking permission. Louis stopped her. Since the day he had pulled her from behind, this was the first time they had met again. Celine had already wanted to talk to him for a long time, and thought this was the perfect opportunity. When Celine asked why he had told Wynn about what had happened that day, Louis replied with slight sarcasm. "So I should not have told him?" Just as she had thought. Louis knew Wynn would be hurt, and had told him on purpose. In a novel, Louis was not the kind of person who would do something like that. He had once been the purest, most upright, and most sincere of men. Celine wondered whether he had changed because of Wynn, or because he had fallen in love with her instead of Adele. A maid came running over in panic, screaming that Prince Wilfresh was in trouble. When they all rushed over, a horrifying sight awaited them. Cordelia slowly turned around, her eyes fixed on them. Pulling out the sword, Cordelia laughed and said, "So, you found me." Rewinding to some time earlier, Cordelia bluntly stated the obvious. If Wilfresh killed her here and now, he would lose everything, and how heartbroken his precious Celine would be. At that moment, Wilfresh reversed the situation and coldly said, "When did I say I would kill you? I said I wanted you to disappear from my life and from Celine's." He handed her a blade covered in dark magic, leaving Cordelia utterly unable to understand what was happening. Her hands moved as if they no longer belonged to her. Wynn curled his lips in satisfaction as that made her stab Wynn straight through. His blood splattered everywhere, and Wynn immediately used the crystal orb that could bring them back to the castle, as if everything had been planned in advance. A maid ran in screaming in terror. Wynn knew very well that Cordelia would be arrested for attempting to murder a member of the royal family. Her life was effectively over. He also held evidence of several of her past murder attempts. That made Cordelia burst into laughter. But she truly loved Wilfresh. She could not believe she had fallen into his trap so easily. Cordelia had always been wary of Will making a move against her, but never once imagined that she herself would be made to do it. And this was not simply because Will did not want Cordelia as his fiancée. He needed Celine to feel safe by proving that Cordelia was the one who had tried to kill her. And on top of that, Cordelia loved Wynn even more after seeing how pitiful he looked. Cordelia thought he was just as insane as she was. Normal people would feel happy when they saw the smile of the person they loved. But what made her happy was seeing that person suffer. That was why she had murdered so many people. One thing Wynn had not accounted for was that Cordelia had no intention of letting him leave alive. Cordelia quickly cast binding magic, leaving Wynn unable to move. Normally, he could have dealt with it, but the long-distance teleportation had consumed too much of his magic. Combined with the blood he had lost, he was on the brink, all because of Cordelia's twisted love. Celine reached out and created a barrier that blasted Cordelia away. Lewis was stunned. It was a barrier created from the power of the goddess. Celine hurried to Wynn's side. While Cordelia was taken away by the royal soldiers, Celine wanted to heal him, but he told her not to. He did not want others discovering her power, but she still tried to heal him. Yet he gently brushed her hand aside. To him, being with her mattered more than anything else. Not long afterward, Adele treated him in time, and he survived. Even so, Celine still felt tormented because she had not been able to save him with her own hands and her own power. On the way back, she thought about how painful it would have been if Wynn had died. It was moments like that that made her realize just how important he was to her. Her goddess power had saved him from Cordelia. She had never been taught how to control magic the way Adele had, because she had to hide her true power. She wished she could confidently protect Wynn and the people around her. But if the whole world learned of her power, the issue of her engagement to Lewis would rise again. She wanted to find a path where she could both use the goddess's power and stay by Wynn's side. After Wynn finished recovering, she came to visit him. The two embraced and poured out their feelings. Then suddenly she blurted out, "Let's get married." He had not expected it at all, although an engagement could be broken off easily. In this country, the royal family and high-ranking nobles were not allowed to divorce. If she married Wynn, all the trouble involving Lewis would be solved, and she would no longer need to hide her goddess power. And if people learned that Celine, the eldest daughter of Duke Eldridge, possessed enormous power, it would very likely make them see Wynn in a completely different light. She had already received her father's approval, but Wynn told her no. He did not want to marry her like this. Just then, Marquis Richard returned with what Wynn had asked him to find. Celine stood up and apologized for saying too much. Wynn tried to explain that things were not what she thought, but when she smiled and said she would come visit him again, the pain was plain on her face. When Richard learned what had happened, he was utterly dumbfounded. Wynn admitted that he had simply been too afraid. His heart could not bear it. Richard could tell that Wynn truly cared deeply for Celine, and that he feared she would choose to sacrifice herself just to stay with him. Richard even found it rather endearing that Wynn still retained a bit of humanity like that, and perhaps he really was gradually maturing. Richard patted his best friend's head to comfort him and promised that he would help. Celine lay sadly on her bed after being rejected by Wynn. She did not understand how things had ended up like this. When he always said that he loved her so much, she felt embarrassed for having confidently thought that he would definitely accept her proposal. It was heartbreaking and painful. Celine had never imagined that Wynn's love could waver, and she was so frightened that even if it faded by only the slightest bit, she would not be able to bear it. Richard burst straight into her room and loudly greeted her with, "Good afternoon, sister-in-law," making Adele unable to resist giving him a light slap. Then, unexpectedly, he told Celine that he had found a woman suitable to become Wilfresh's wife. Things seemed to be getting worse and worse for Celine. The woman had even said that she understood the relationship between Celine and Wynn, and did not mind if from now on the two of them only kept a relationship like family. Celine knew that she could still continue being part of Wynn's family. She wondered why she did not feel happy at all. That would have been perfect for Wynn, and they could have gone back to the way things were before. And then she finally understood. She had always loved Wynn, but now those feelings were different. She told Richard that she did not want to become Wynn's family anymore, because she loved him as a man. She did not know when those feelings had begun, but she did not want him to marry another woman. Richard clapped in approval, thinking it was wonderful. After all, everything he had said earlier had only been a lie. He had gone to no small amount of trouble to make her realize that. After all, there was no way he could persuade Wynn to be with someone else. Celine's face flushed red at that moment. Adele kept hitting Richard, saying he was really mean. But Richard found her like that incredibly cute. Celine then ran off, filled with confidence in her feelings. Carrying her love with her, she wanted to tell Wynn how she truly felt. Meanwhile, Lewis went to visit Cordelia in the dark prison cell. He wanted to know why she had tried to kill Celine. Cordelia replied that Celine should never have touched what belonged to her. Even so, she said that she liked Celine. She said Celine was beautiful, lovable, and pure. At that moment, Lewis could understand why the Queen had chosen Cordelia to marry Wynn. She must have thought Celine would kill him. But he was stunned to hear that Wilfresh had been the one who arranged everything. The two of them had also agreed that letting Wynn continue to live was far too dangerous. Cordelia truly wanted to see Louis and Wynne fight to the death, but sadly, she was about to be sentenced to execution. As Louis left, she thought he really was very much like both her and Wynne. While Celine was waiting for Wynne, she was surprised to see Louis appear. He apologized for what had happened with Cordelia and tried to explain that the assassination attempt against her had actually all been staged by Fresh. There was no way Wynne could be so easily defeated by a girl. Celine began to feel uneasy. So had Wynne let Cordelia stab him just to make her pity him? Louis told Celine that she didn't even realize she was being deceived and brainwashed. She tried to deny it, but Louis immediately asked how she could possibly be so sure. Then she answered in a way Louis had never expected. She didn't care about that. She accepted Wynne for who he was, because she loved him as a man. Louis clenched his fist when he heard Celine say that she planned to marry Wynne as soon as possible. She stood up to leave, but Louis grew desperate and grabbed her hand. He forced her against the wall and said that he truly loved her. Celine told him to stop because she loved Wynne. And right then, Louis forcibly kissed her. She pushed him away, but after catching his breath, he forced another kiss on her. Only when he realized Celine was crying did he finally stop. Celine said he was cruel because she had trusted him. Then she ran off, wiping away her tears. After that, Wynne came to see Celine. A heavy atmosphere hung in the air. Celine had not left her room for 3 whole days and had barely eaten or drunk anything. No one understood what had happened outside her room. Wynne apologized for what he had said to her the other day. He said that, of course, he wanted to stay by her side for the rest of his life, and that he had used her pity for him to keep her beside him. Only now did Celine understand why Wynne had looked so sad. He thought she had proposed him out of pity. He felt guilty for forcing the engagement on her, and now wanted to wait until her heart was truly ready. Hearing Celine begin to cry, Wynne stepped into the room to talk to her. She told him that 3 days ago, she had gone to the castle to find him, but had happened to run into Prince Louis Percival instead. Louis was there, and he had forcibly kissed her. Hearing those words, his heart seemed to drop into an abyss. Even so, he took it better than she expected, especially after learning that his feelings were no longer one-sided. She loved him as a man. The two kissed, giving each other a promise that they would stay together forever. That night, after returning home, Wynne went mad in his study, smashing everything in sight. He was furious over what Louis had done. The rage and killing intent made his head feel like it might explode, but he still couldn't kill Louis. If he did, he would be no different from Cordelia, and he would lose his future with Celine. Although he was happy that Celine had finally looked at him as a man, imposter syndrome still came crashing down on him. He wondered how long Celine would still be able to love him. What if one day she fell in love with another man? He thought he was not the kind of person worthy of being loved by a beautiful girl like her. But then he rang the bell and summoned the butler to arrange a meeting with the king. He had to act quickly to protect Celine. At Duke Eldridge's estate, he presented the marriage contract that had already been signed by his father. All that was needed was Duke Eldridge's approval, and 6 months later, they could hold the wedding. Celine's father asked Wynne to promise that he would protect and love her for the rest of her life. Without the slightest hesitation, Wynne promised to give her everything from this point on. Since Wynne would be extremely busy from now on, he decided to assign a personal guard to stay by Celine's side. When only the two of them were alone, Wynne told Celine that he had been forced to make a promise in exchange for the king's permission for their marriage. That promise was to take part in a monster hunt. It had been confirmed that a drake had appeared in the forest near the second city. For now, it was still hiding quietly, but no one knew when it might suddenly go berserk. Wynne had been assigned to lead the force to subjugate that monster. Celine remembered clearly that an adult drake was an extremely dangerous creature, with dragon-like scales, deadly poison in its body, and the ability to breathe fire. She tried to persuade Wynne to refuse the mission, but he only reassured her that everything would be fine. To him, being able to marry her made a small price like this mean nothing. Celine suggested going with him, since she could heal poison and wounds. But he kept refusing, even threatening to lock her up to keep her safe. Then Wynne laughed it off and said he was only joking. He did not want her involved in this. Elsewhere, the queen was punishing a maid by beating her. Louis stepped in to stop his mother, trying to calm her down. Otherwise, her already ruined reputation would only get worse. Recently, Fresh had submitted evidence to the king of the crimes she had committed in the past. The proof was serious enough to threaten her position as queen and had enraged the king. She turned to scold her son, saying that everything she had done was to put Louis on the imperial throne. But Louis only curled his lips in a smile. He reminded her that she had also lined her own pockets quite well, so how could she say it was all for him? Wynne had been granted permission to marry the Duke of Eldrith's eldest daughter, even though he carried commoner blood. Knowing that Wynne was about to be sent to slay the Drake, the Queen decided to use this chance to assassinate him. While Celine and Wynne were happily dining together in the capital, she suddenly remembered that today was the day of Cordelia's execution. Even though Cordelia had tried to kill Celine and had massacred many people, Celine still could not help feeling a little guilty because of the time they had once spent together. Wynne went to witness Cordelia being hanged properly on the gallows, and Cordelia died with a smile on her lips. Afterward, he ran into Louis. Wynne pinned him to the wall and gripped his collar tightly. The two glared at each other coldly, neither willing to back down. Wynne had the upper hand because Celine loved him, but Louis still held the truth that he had once stolen a kiss from Celine. No, to be exact, 2 kisses. Just thinking about that alone made Wynne's heart feel heavy. In the end, Celine managed to join the monster subjugation mission, and she also brought many knights from the Duke's territory with her. Wynne could only sigh, knowing that he could not stop her. He only asked her to make sure no one discovered her true identity. On the way, as he escorted her back, Wynne suddenly leaned down and kissed her deeply. He even pressed forward gently with his tongue. Celine hurriedly told him to stop, saying that maybe this was still too soon. He immediately pouted, saying he wanted to kiss her and do even more than that. Blushing, she told him to wait until after they were married. Then, because she was so flustered, she quickly got out of the carriage and walked home, while Wynne thought to himself that even though she looked adorable like that, he had absolutely no intention of waiting until the wedding. After that, Adele firmly insisted on going with Celine on the monster subjugation mission. Celine tried to persuade Richard to stop her, but he had already tried 100 times before finally coming to talk to her. He thought Adele had an incredibly cute face, but a stubborn personality. That was exactly why he had decided to go along and use all his strength to protect her. Celine secretly thought she really liked the expression Adele always wore, as if she had completely had enough of him. And so this monster, subjugation, ended up turning into a rather strange sort of double date. For this mission, Celine disguised herself as a black-haired girl with violet eyes named Brenda. She wore a pair of magic glasses that concealed perception and prevented others from recognizing her true identity. She took the name of Adele's maid, so she could stay close to her in that disguise. They had the Knights of Duke Eldridge, Wynne's personal guard, and many other royal knights assigned by the king to protect Adele. Wynne went with the main force while she separated from them, so he could command the operation directly. Then a small goblin suddenly attacked. Startled, Adele threw herself into Richard's arms, and he brought it down with a single shot. Celine was amazed by his skill. After killing a few more monsters along the way, the group stopped to rest. Richard asked Adele if she had fallen for him all over again. He was delighted when she answered yes. At that moment, all he wanted was to hurry back home so he could spend more time with her. They began to feel that something was strange when they still had not seen Wynne's main force or the Drake. They had followed orders and gone with the king's knights. But when they asked why those knights were not keeping in contact with Wynne through magical devices, those men suddenly drew their weapons and surrounded everyone. The Duke's knights were about to step in to help, but Adele told them to stop. Richard quickly realized that the royal knights were here to separate them from the main force. Their goal was to prevent Adele from using her goddess power to help Wynne. So Celine decided to go alone. The knights assumed she was just a lowly maid, so they paid no attention when they saw her leave. The personal guard Wynne had assigned to protect Celine immediately followed her. A while later, on the road, Celine was horrified to find the defeated Drake, along with many blood-soaked corpses of knights scattered around. A few hours earlier, Wynne had received word that they were about to reach the Drake. He thought that with so many knights, killing it would be over quickly. But he also knew it was very likely that the Queen's people would make a move against him, and this would be their best chance. The battle had tilted in Wynne's favor, but just as he was about to deliver the finishing blow, the knights suddenly betrayed him and attacked, forcing him to turn and defend himself. He knew the Queen might try something, but he never expected that every single knight assigned to him would be an enemy. He immediately ordered his subordinates to deal with them. Not far away, Celine found Win sitting collapsed on the ground, covered in blood and completely exhausted. She rushed to his side. She let out a sigh of relief when she felt that his heart was still beating. Using healing magic, she wondered why his complexion was still not improving. The guard told her that it was likely because he had lost too much blood. Just then, another group of royal knights arrived. The attendant guard was knocked down, and it seemed that death for both her and Win was near. But Celine's goddess power suddenly erupted and blasted them back. Adele and Richard found the two of them not long after, and Celine immediately fainted. 3 days later, Celine woke to the overwhelming relief of her maid Jenna, who was overjoyed to know that her lady was safe. Win was safe too, but he was still unconscious. He was being treated in a secure place inside the royal palace. Celine was so happy that she'd burst into tears. However, not everything was good news. Word of Celine's powerful goddess ability spread quickly. Adele explained that after the subjugation, the Duke's knights had captured all the surviving royal knights, and every one of them confessed that they had attacked Win on the Queen's orders. Win gave the same testimony, making it almost impossible for the Queen to conceal this large-scale assassination plot any longer. 5 days later, Celine was assessed by the Archbishop and declared to possess a goddess power even stronger than Adele's. But from this point on, many things in her life would change. Even though witnesses had confirmed the Queen's involvement in the assassination attempt, without physical evidence, she still had not been brought to trial. Celine was overjoyed to see Win again, so much so that she threw herself straight into his arms. He rested his head on her shoulder. During the last battle, he had truly thought he was going to die. He was afraid that he would never be able to see Celine again. The two shared a kiss, and then he pulled her closer, holding her hand tightly. He wanted to feel life more clearly, wanted to be sure that she was really there beside him. He asked if that was all right, and she said yes. And from there, the kiss deepened. Meanwhile, the Queen sank even deeper into madness from her hatred. Celine was the one who had ruined all her plans. She had lost so many knights that by now the king did not even want to see her. The Queen decided to give her son, Louis, a precious imported medicine. The drug had an enchanting effect. Though it would not last long, it would be enough for Louis to have a child with Celine. The Queen did not like Celine at all, but if she became pregnant with her son's child, she would consider making her a secondary consort. Louis refused. He had no need for such a thing. He said he would only act if one harmed Celine. That made the Queen furious. Everyone who had ever stood in her way had died. She had never once hesitated to kill anyone. A grand ceremony was being held to honor the two sisters who possessed the goddess's power. The people joyfully celebrated Celine, who had only recently awakened, along with her fiancé, the second prince, who was rumored to have defeated a drake. Celine decided to step outside for some fresh air, and somehow she ran into Louis. Celine had not seen him since the day he forced that kiss on her. She immediately turned to leave, but Louis called out to her. He tried to apologize once more, but of course she could not forgive him. She had once thought Louis was a gentle and wonderful person. He had always treated her kindly, and as a person, she had once loved him. But there was no guarantee that he would not repeat what he had done before. In pain, Louis realized that everything could never return to the way it used to be. The party ended peacefully, and as everyone prepared to leave, blood suddenly began to spill from the corner of Celine's mouth. She collapsed to the floor. Win and Adele hurriedly tried to heal her, but her magic had no effect at all. Afterward, Win came to see her. Only then did everyone learn that during the party, Celine had accidentally drunk a slow-acting poison. It was a special kind of poison that magic could not cure. Fortunately, the doctor managed to prepare an antidote in time, but it truly had been a brush with death. Win was certain that the Queen was behind this. The very first time he came to the palace, something similar had happened to him as well. The Queen was the kind of person who never left any evidence behind. She was truly cruel and cunning. So from now on, Win decided that he would sleep here with Celine every night. That way, she would be completely safe. He had just arrived by teleportation magic. Although she felt more at ease when he was beside her, she still found herself wondering why a faint, indescribable unease was rising in her heart. The clock struck 11. After a day of work, Win returned to Celine's room. He smiled happily when he saw that she was still waiting for him, but he told her she could have gone to sleep first. As he lightly kissed her hair, he asked if she was nervous. because she would be sleeping beside him tonight. Celine suddenly sat up, her face bright red, her breath warm, and stammered that she would go to sleep right away. Lying face to face, Wynne slowly recalled that it had been a long time since he had last stayed the night in her room. Before, he had secretly come here a few times because he claimed he often had terrifying nightmares. But Celine was surprised to learn that had only been a lie. Even back then, he had simply wanted to be with her. She answered gently with a soft remark that he really was full of affection. Back then, she had been terribly afraid that her father would find out. And even now, it still felt as though they were doing something wrong. And just then, Wynne said that perhaps they ought to do something even more exciting. He brought his lips close to hers and climbed over her. A moment of deep passion flickered between them, but he stopped because he did not want her to lose sleep. Even though he still longed for more, Celine was so embarrassed that she pulled the blanket up to the bridge of her nose. When she drifted off to sleep, he placed a light kiss on her forehead. Then he got up, returned to the desk, and continued the work he had left unfinished. Thanks to him, she slept soundly, and from then on, he came to her room every night. During the day, she practiced controlling her goddess powers while also receiving princess training as Wynne's fiancée. One evening, Wynne mentioned that Richard had recently become troublesome with his public displays of affection. Celine knew that next week, Adele was planning to confess her love to Richard. Even so, the king and queen still had not given up on forcing Adele to marry Louis. That night, while asleep, Celine suddenly woke and discovered that Wynne had disappeared. Blood was scattered across the floor. He had left her a note explaining that he would be busy for a while and would come see her as soon as things had calmed down. For days had passed, yet she still had not seen Wynne again. He would not tell her what all that blood had been about, only that he was fine. On the way to her daily lesson, Celine came across Adele and Richard. She was about to greet them when she overheard. Adele mentioned that Count M's daughter had proposed to him. Richard looked worried that she knew about it, but reassured her that it was not something she needed to concern herself with. But of course, Adele could not help worrying. In the end, she admitted that she loved him and did not want him to become engaged to another woman. She had wanted to say this sooner, but had only been too stubborn. Richard dropped to the floor. He was so happy he felt as if he could die on the spot. He had waited for that moment for so long. But hearing her actually say it made his emotions even stronger than he had imagined. He thought perhaps he should have reacted more maturely. But that was fine too, because she liked him just the way he was. The two of them embraced warmly, deciding that from now on they would officially act as a couple. That night, Wynne finally returned. He apologized for not being able to stay by her side these past few days and said he would still be absent for a few more. At the same time, he left a guard to protect her in his place. He believed that no assassin would dare come near this place. During that time, he was also preparing everything for their wedding. The ceremony would take place 3 months from now. He was considering buying a mansion in the royal capital because letting Celine continue living in the palace was too dangerous. Setting that aside for the moment, Celine knew she needed to prepare herself mentally because once the wedding took place, Wynne had no intention of letting her sleep peacefully that night. He had already held himself back long enough. On another day, good news came from Adele. Their father had approved her engagement to Richard. Adele happily left that day to go see Richard. After that, Wynne came to see Celine. He missed her, since they had been apart for 5 full days. And Celine noticed a trace of red on his sleeve. He made an excuse, saying it was probably from some trash he had just cleaned up. But honestly, that was probably one of the worst lies in existence. Even Celine realized that he had clearly just made someone log out of life again. Smiling, Wynne explained that the other day, 6 men had broken into her room, and he had just finished dealing with the last one. Naturally, it had been the Queen's doing. That was the reason for the pool of blood in her room that day. It had taken Wynne quite a while to track down and finish off all the ones who had escaped, which was why he had been absent so often lately. He confirmed that the Queen had hired a group of assassins, and that he had gathered evidence of her other crimes as well. He intended to formally accuse her within the next 3 months. For now, he was threatening her and keeping her under close surveillance so that she could not do anything else. The only reason he had not acted yet was because, by law, when a member of the royal family commits a crime, all ceremonies and banquets, including the weddings of other royal family members, are forbidden for 1 year. But before that point, he still needed to overthrow the king as well. The king had committed far too many crimes on a whim. always resolving everything through power and murder. Wynne believed he was even harder to deal with than the Queen. But bad news struck when Richard and Adele entered the room to report that Prince Louis Percival had just formally accused the Queen. The Queen flew into a rage and stormed straight into her son's study. And when she demanded to know why he was treating her this way, Louis only replied that this would come to light sooner or later. Better that she hear it from Louis than from Wilfred. The Queen completely broke down, realizing that Louis was doing this to stop Celine's marriage. He truly had become that desperate. Louis ordered the soldiers to take his mother away, and though he knew she would never forgive him, he continued on as if nothing had happened. Staring at the vial of medicine his mother had given him to seduce Celine, he swore that he would never let her get married. Bitterly, Wynne wished he had killed Louis first. Richard then, using the excuse that the conversation to come would be rather complicated, asked Adele to step outside for a while. After that, he presented the only plan they had to get out of this situation. Celine would have to become pregnant with Wynne's child. Celine was not at all ready for that. But for the royal family, ensuring an heir was always the highest priority. Richard had learned this after reading through all the documents in the royal archives. That was also one of his talents. Richard never forgot anything he had read, not even once. Since the Queen had not yet been sentenced, they still had time, and if Celine became pregnant, the wedding could still proceed as planned. He realized that Celine was a little hesitant about intimacy before marriage, so he reassured her that it would be fine. They could simply lie because there was no way to verify it. So all they needed to do was prepare false evidence that she was pregnant. Even so, there was still a price to pay. If it became public that she had had relations before marriage, Celine's image as a proper lady would be damaged. But as long as she told the truth to her family, everything would still be all right. On the way back with Richard, Wynne let out all of his fury. After taking everything from Louis, he would drive him into despair, then personally kill him slowly with his own hands. Richard was extremely surprised to learn that Louis loved Celine enough to betray even his own mother. Thinking about how Louis had sincerely loved her all this time, he felt a little sympathy, but he also understood that love does not always reward everyone equally. The plan was for them to dine at the palace so that Celine could pretend to be drunk and stay in Wynne's room. But the problem was that she was not very confident in her acting ability, so she drank more than necessary. Yet while the two of them were still fussing over each other, they ran into Louis in the hallway, and, right in front of him, Wynne told Celine that they should go back to his room, then casually walked past him. Louis immediately ordered the butler to keep watch on Celine until she returned home. He was deeply uneasy. Celine and Wynne sat beside the bed, and she felt extremely restless. His original plan had only been to disturb the bed and leave behind a little blood, but he worried that if an investigation were launched, they might probe deeper than expected with magic. They began kissing, and when he leaned over her, he said that today they should practice a little more thoroughly. Someone might be listening in, so he wanted their intimate gestures to look more real. He tried slipping a hand under her skirt and lifting it, but then restrained himself. To him, she was just too adorable. So much so that he was no longer sure how much longer he could keep control. Yet it was she who took hold of his shirt. She was worried that if other people found out they had not actually done anything, things would become troublesome. If that happened, their wedding would only be delayed. Louis had once accused his own mother, so she guessed that he would be the one to make sure the investigation was carried out most thoroughly. She did not object to going further with Wynne. She was just a little shy, but at the same time, it also made her feel safe and happy. She told him that she did not mind. That made him freeze for a moment, and then he lowered himself to kiss her again. And this time, he no longer intended to hold back. They kept going, their clothes gradually falling away, and at last they went all the way until everything was over. Wynne was so happy he felt as though he could die content. He had always imagined what it would be like to touch her. She had to cover his mouth with her hand. She did not want things to become any more embarrassing than they already were. But to her, he far surpassed everything she had imagined. She thought he was handsome, strong, and irresistibly charming. She could truly feel how deeply he loved her. Placing a gentle kiss on her forehead, he said he was very glad she felt the same way. And from now on, they could do that much more often. The next day, after seeing her off, he returned to speak with Richard. But to be honest, this next part left me shocked, even though by this point I probably should not have been surprised anymore. because everything that had happened last night went owed to Lewis for making such a huge fuss over everything. What happened last night spread everywhere almost immediately. That was one of Wynn's calculated moves. He had deliberately taken a detour back to his room, passing through the route Lewis usually walked every night. And the moment she saw him, the unease in Celine's heart had been stirred up. Even so, Wynn had never forced her. Every choice had been her own. Richard silently felt grateful that he had been born a man, and that Wynn had absolutely no feelings for him in that way. Last night, Lewis had nearly coughed up blood when the butler brought the news that Celine and Wynn had definitely had premarital relations. He tried to deny it, insisting that Celine would never do such a thing. In his eyes, it was Wynn who had sullied her. Lewis believed that Celine had been deceived, and that he had to save her before things went too far. While Adele and Celine were chatting over tea, Richard suddenly appeared behind his girl and wrapped his arms around her. He had just finished his work and happened to be passing by the main street. Neither of the girls noticed that they were becoming the center of attention. They were the two most talked about names in the entire kingdom. They talked about how the queen had been brought to trial. Normally, this would never have proceeded so quickly, but it showed just how serious Lewis was. Fortunately, they had moved one step ahead because it was Celine and Wynn themselves who had set everything in motion. Adele immediately flushed bright red. She had had no idea they had really done it. She had thought they were only pretending, just as in the original plan. That evening, Jenna brought Celine a letter from Wynn, saying that he had been badly injured and needed her help. The letter asked her to come to the palace without letting anyone know, because someone was trying to assassinate him and he could not make the matter public. Celine hurried there at once, but the one waiting for her was not Wynn. It was Prince Louis Percival. She froze in shock, panic flooding her when she realized that it had not been Wynn who summoned her, but him. Lewis had prepared a forged letter imitating Wilfred's handwriting just to lure her here, while Wilfred himself was far away from the palace at the time. Celine pounded on the door and cried out for help, but there was no answer at all. Everything was useless because Lewis had sealed the room with magic. She could not get out, and her voice could not reach anyone either. He forced her back against the door, saying that he had no other choice, because he could not secure a future with her otherwise. Even the goddess's protective barrier did not work. In this room, no one but him could use magic. Restricting magic so that only one person could use it was incredibly complicated. Celine realized he had deliberately prepared all of this in advance before luring her here. Lewis said that he loved her and only wanted her to love him back. He forced a kiss on her, then dropped an empty vial and told her she had to swallow all of it. She wanted to spit it out, but she could not breathe. And now he was demanding that she look straight into his eyes, causing her to fall into a state of enchantment. Celine could no longer suppress the desire to touch Lewis. A desire so intense it was terrifying. While Wynn was returning from a meeting, Richard rushed over, panting. Celine had disappeared. The guard assigned to protect Celine realized that Wilfred still had not appeared at the appointed time mentioned in the letter. He tried to force his way into the room, but Lewis's knights immediately drew their swords to stop him. He fired a spell at the door, but his magic was blocked. Inside the room, Lewis could sense that the drug had begun to take effect. This medicine could enchant anyone, but it only lasted for half a day. Its power would peak about 6 hours after being taken. His plan after she drank, it was to make her pregnant with his child first, so that she would no longer have any future with Wilfred. He knew just how depraved he had become, but this blind love had made him lose his reason completely, using even his own younger brother as bait, and relying on a drug like this on top of it. How disgusting. This was the very method his mother had used to obtain the title of queen. He had sworn he would never become someone like her. He knew that when the drug wore off and she came back to herself, she would hate him. She would cry and curse him. She would never want to see his face again. But even so, he still did not want to hand her over to Wilfred. At first, he had only been curious. He had once viewed Celine as selfish, foolish, and powerless. But then suddenly, she became a completely different person. The more time he spent with her, the more drawn to her he became. She was frank, cheerful, and strangely kind. He wondered if it was because he had grown up among greedy parents and people who only knew how to bow and flatter the first prince. When he was with Celine, he felt safe and happy. He wondered just what had happened to him. He had once thought he lived more uprightly than Wilfred, until not long ago. He could easily have used his power and status to force her to become his fiancée, but instead, he respected her wish to marry the person she truly loved. He told her that he loved her, then waited for the day she would return to him. He pinned her down, kissing her as he whispered an apology. Then his eyes widened when he realized something. Even though the drug had fully taken effect, she was still crying just like last time. He couldn't believe it. He had tested that drug on other people before. It should have worked perfectly. He couldn't believe she loved Wilfred that deeply. He reached out and wiped away one of her tears. Then he suddenly realized that what he loved most was her smile and slowly sat upright. Pressing a hand to his face, he blamed himself for always being half-hearted about everything. At that moment, the door was blasted open and Wynn appeared. Breathing hard, with blood smeared across his sleeve, he saw the kiss marks on Celine Eldridge's neck. He instantly wanted to tear Prince Louis Percival apart on the spot. Earlier, he and Richard had ridden toward the castle like madmen. Wynn blamed himself for being too careless. He had never imagined Louis would harm Celine. No matter how cruel Louis had been to him or to the Queen, Wynn believed Louis was merely repeating the exact path his mother had once taken. The Queen had not come from a noble bloodline, and the King had never loved her. She had used an aphrodisiac on the King to create a fait accompli. And that was how Louis had been born. Wynn had struggled to determine their location because the castle was enormous. So he cast his magic over the entire palace to find the one place where the flow of magic was being blocked. The price he paid was tremendous, but he found immediately when he reached that room, his guards had already taken care of all of Louis's knights, but he still couldn't break through Louis's barrier. So Wynn placed his hand on the door, and together with Richard, shattered it. Wynn grabbed Louis by the collar and hurled him aside. Then he began punching him in the face over and over. As he struck him, he shouted, "How dare you do this to Celine? You used to be someone important to her. She trusted you." When Wynn was about to drive his sword down, Richard stopped him. Killing Louis now would only worsen his position. Louis told Wynn to go ahead and do it, but he froze in shock when the blade pierced the floor right beside his head. In the end, Wynn did not want to do anything that would make Celine suffer. He knew that if Louis died here, she would blame herself. But he was certain that sooner or later, Louis would end up on the gallows. Wynn looked at Celine with sorrow in his eyes, then softly apologized. Back at Richard's estate, Adele was sobbing, frightened and worried. Richard told her to step outside first, so he could speak privately with Wynn for a moment. Wynn let out a sigh of relief when, after the doctor examined her, he learned that Louis had only gotten halfway and had not truly done anything. Even so, Celine could not escape the rumors of infidelity spreading through the castle. Richard said Wynn was truly strong. If Louis had dared do that to Adele, he would have killed that filthy bastard on the spot. Then Richard left the room, and Wynn thanked him. But once only the two of them remained, things took a completely unexpected turn. Celine opened her eyes and called Prince Louis's name. Wynn reached out toward her, but she instantly slapped his hand away in alarm. She demanded that he let her go, then kept calling for Prince Louis. He wrapped his arms tightly around her from behind, but she told him to stop, saying she hated it. When he saw the kiss marks on her neck, he broke down in tears. He knew it was all because of the drug, but watching her push him away hurt more than he could bear. The pain was unbearable. She wouldn't even look at him once. Celine woke up with Adele beside her. She panicked when she remembered what had happened. Up until the moment Louis kissed her and forced her to drink the drug, she remembered everything. After that, she remembered nothing. Adele reassured her that none of it was her fault. But when Celine learned what had happened, and that the effects of the drug had continued even after she had been brought back here, she was consumed by guilt. She left the room and found Wynn looking utterly haggard. With deep dark circles under his eyes, he looked exhausted. She burst into tears and kept apologizing to him. Only now did she understand just how badly she had hurt him, and he pulled her into his arms. He blamed himself for not being able to protect her, but he was also overwhelmingly relieved that she had returned to normal. Celine told Wynn that she loved only him. Celine decided to rest a little longer, and when he was about to leave, she hurriedly grabbed his hand. Worried, she asked if he hated her now. Wynn said she had done nothing wrong. He said that he was the weak and foolish one. He confessed that he didn't know where to put these feelings. He hadn't killed the bastard he hated. He had let that man touch her, even if only a little, and he had put her in danger. Everything filled him with pain, sorrow, rage, and regret. He felt as if he were about to go mad. Even knowing that Celine had been hurt, he still longed to kiss her and touch her. He wanted to erase all of those memories, but he couldn't stop himself from thinking so selfishly. He believed it would be better if she did not stay with someone like him. And then, Celine suddenly pulled Wynne closer and kissed him. She said she wanted him to touch her. They continued, and this time, he knew he could no longer be gentle. They clung to each other until she was utterly exhausted and fainted. He swore that he would never again let anyone hurt her. The next day, the four of them had a meal at one of the most luxurious restaurants around. The place was so famous, it was practically notorious, and getting a reservation there was incredibly difficult. Normally, people had to wait for years, but Wynne's status as the second prince made things much easier. And at the end of the meal, Wynne gave Celine a wedding gift, a hairpin, a one-of-a-kind piece of jewelry that he had spent half a year commissioning. She thanked her future husband and said she was very happy. Long after that incident, Celine quietly prepared for her wedding. Adele took over most of the tasks related to the goddess's divine power in her place. Meanwhile, Louis was placed under house arrest in the palace. What had happened between Prince Louis and the second prince's fiancée absolutely could not be made public. Even Celine's parents had no idea what had happened that day. On top of that, no trace of any aphrodisiac was found in her body. So if Louis insisted it had been consensual, things would only become even worse. After the meal, Celine felt a little unwell. She told Adele she was fine, that perhaps she had simply eaten too much. She decided she would let the doctor examine her later. In the carriage, Wynne vented his anger in front of Richard. He felt that his fiancée was forcing herself too much. She kept pretending to be fine in front of everyone. He wanted to deal with Louis before the wedding, but the king kept getting in the way. The king would use any means possible to protect his heir. The only consolation was that the first prince had no intention of resisting. Even so, Wynne still could not forgive Louis. No matter how much he regretted it, Wynne would not forgive him. Even the queen, despite her long list of crimes, had only been sentenced to life imprisonment. The king had interfered far too much, beyond the limits of what Wynne could endure. He swore that he would destroy all of them. Celine met with Wynne Lamina, who had helped arrange for her to see a doctor. She did not have any serious illness, but she had felt something unusual in her body for weeks. She did not want to make Wynne or Adele worry. The doctor smiled and congratulated Celine. She was about 3 months pregnant. The health problems from before had only been the early symptoms. Celine could not believe that there was a tiny life growing inside her. It was her child with Wilfred. She was so happy she could hardly breathe. Adele's eyes filled with tears when she heard the news. She congratulated her. They would tell their parents at the right time. Those who still believed everything between them had only been an act would surely be utterly shocked by this. But just imagining that Wynne would finally have a real family filled Celine's heart with happiness. That was the very first thing she thought of when she learned she was pregnant. Wynne's birth mother had died when he was still young, and ever since then, he had always lived alone. Celine wanted to give him a warm home filled with love. Meanwhile, Wynne was extremely irritated. He summoned one of his trusted subordinates and told him a password to Richard that they would make their move in 3 days. Richard thought the decision was too sudden, but Wynne explained that the king had pressured him to withdraw from the matter involving the first prince. The king had even threatened to expose that filthy incident if he did not obey. That would leave Celine carrying a stain of disgrace, a woman who betrayed her fiancé to carry on with Prince Louis. Even a bastard like his father knew how to care about his own children. Richard resolved to get rid of the king no matter what. He was the center of the rot in this kingdom. They could not confront him openly. The king's political power would crush them, so their plan was to kill him within 3 days. No matter what happened, Richard swore he would stand by Wynne to the very end. Besides, taking revenge on the man who had ruined his mother would also lift an enormous burden from his heart. Richard kept this from Adele while Wynne hesitated. He wasn't sure whether he should hide it from Celine. He knew it was tormenting him. Late one evening, Celine and Wynne went for a walk together. Suddenly, he told her that he was going to act against the king. There were many reasons for it, but in the end, he simply could not forgive him. He had originally intended to keep it to himself, but in the end, he told her anyway. Perhaps he hoped that after he completed his revenge, she would still be able to accept him. She knew he must have struggled terribly before making that decision. It was probably because of her. She could not fully understand his pain. And she also knew that what she was about to say was both selfish and cruel, but she did not want him to raise his hand against anyone. Before he could answer, she confessed that she was pregnant. Their child. Wait, pause for about 2 seconds. At this point, we've caught up to the author's current progress, and there is no more content beyond this for now. Now I want to share a few of my personal thoughts. At first, the writing of this story felt fairly generic, but from around the second half onward, somewhere around the chapters where Wynn reflects on how guilty he feels for manipulating Celine into staying by his side and agonizes over all of that, the series really starts to stand out, and the script quality improves noticeably. You might not agree with this opinion, but I found Wynn's manipulative, psychologically twisted kind of love to be very realistic. You're hearing that from someone who has thought at times on a level similar to his. Of course, not including the part about wanting to make people disappear. The real climax was the part where Louis used the love potion on Celine. My God, when I got to that scene, my stomach was completely twisted up. If he had actually forced himself on her, I think I would have felt too sick to bear it. It's a pretty interesting series. Let me know what you think. And I also want to add that Adele and Richard are an incredibly adorable couple. Do you want me to come back and continue covering this series when it resumes? Please subscribe to the channel to see more content. And now, go ahead and watch this next video. See you all in the next one. Bye.